Chapter 381. Such a Crazy Woman. Yi Siling looked at the arrogant Bai Shanshui and could not help but frown and say coldly, regardless of whether Ding Ning's plan was perfect or not, in this plan, Bai Shanshui had to deal with Su Fanqin alone. She was the strongest swordsman in Jiaodong Commandery other than the Empress. You speak as though you are not a crazy woman. Bai Shanshui's smile grew brighter. Yi Siling sat down on the bamboo chair next to her. He bowed his head, and a dazed emotion flashed through his eyes. Ding Ning's style of conduct caused her to think of that person more and more, and she found him more and more familiar. That person's plans were often flawless and advanced step by step. His final failure was because he had mistakenly believed some people from the start. Empress Zhengxiu was used to leaving behind a backup plan for everything she did, and that person was used to killing two birds with one stone. He would calculate many people in one matter, and often people would not be able to connect the dots. Not just cultivation methods that can be passed down, but even methods of conduct can be passed down. And so many years after you died, Yi Siling thought. She started to feel that her thoughts were crazy, and she was a crazy woman. After killing Daoist Qian and entering the tea garden to make palace attendant Rong's secret lover kneel in front of him for a day, everyone in Chongling waited for the carriage from Ink Garden to leave again. The Deer Mountain Conference had ended, Yangshan Commandery had been taken back, and the Min Mountain Sword Trials had ended. For the time being, there did not seem to be any major events in the Qin dynasty. Ding Ning's revenge had become the biggest show of the Qin dynasty in the summer. Yet, to everyone's surprise, before the Ink Garden carriage left Ink Garden, a carriage of sufficient weight came to Ink Garden. This carriage came from Fangho Province. Ding Ning did not ask. He left Ink Garden and boarded the carriage. Jing Liuli followed him like a true attendant and sat next to him. This time, even if Ding Ning did not explain, Jing Liuli knew why the carriage from Fangho Province had come. When Ding Ning killed Daoist Qian, the borrowing sword essence he used to defeat Daoist Qian did not come from White Goat Cave or Min Mountain Sword Sect, but from Fangho Province. Min Mountain Sword Sect would investigate every student participating in the Min Mountain Sword Trials, and the bureaus would cooperate. In the information of Min Mountain Sword Sect, Ding Ning had no contact with Fangho Province before this. So how did Ding Ning know the secret swords of Fangho Province? This carriage did not head towards Fangho Province. Instead, it headed towards a remote and desolate courtyard. Ding Ning was very calm because he could be said to be more familiar with every street and alley in Chongling than anyone else. He even knew what kind of people lived in most of the houses. That remote and desolate courtyard was where Feng Xiumu had secluded himself to cultivate. When the door opened, a thick medicinal smell caused Jing Liuli to unconsciously stop breathing. She had boiled medicine for Ding Ning for a long time, but even the ferocious medicine could not compare to this medicinal smell. This medicinal smell seemed to be mixed with at least 50 or 60 kinds of powerful medicinal herbs. This medicinal smell came from a man sitting on a rattan chair in front of the pond. Most of his body was wrapped in thick bandages. It seemed that he could barely maintain his human form with the help of these bandages. He could barely sit there and look at Ding Ning and Jing Liuli. Jing Liuli's eyes unconsciously narrowed, not because of the medicinal smell, but because of this person's status and respect. She knew this person was Fang Xiang, the Fang Xiang who had played an important role in the Deer Mountain Conference, but whose meridians were all broken. Please sit. This marquis, who had once dominated the world but was now paler than Wang Taishu at his weakest, looked up slightly at Ding Ning and Jing Liuli, who were walking into the courtyard. His head was the only part he could move right now. Ding Ning bowed seriously to him and then sat down on the rattan chair in front of him. There was another rattan chair next to him, clearly prepared for Jing Liuli. But Jing Liuli did not sit and stood respectfully behind Ding Ning with her head bowed. Looking at this scene, the admiration in Fang Xiang's eyes grew stronger. Why do you know the Fang family's borrowing sword essence? However, his words were very direct, and there was no transition at all when he asked such a question. Ding Ning looked into his eyes and said directly, Fang Xiumu came to Falling Parasol to see me. Jing Liuli immediately frowned. This may be a detail that Min Mountain Sword Sect had overlooked. She clearly remembered that there was no such record in the records she had seen. Fang Xiang looked at Ding Ning and did not say anything. Then he suddenly laughed. So, my brother passed it to you, even though you were not a cultivator back then? Ding Ning looked calmly at his eyes and smiled and did not answer. Fang Xiang continued. So as long as I can confirm that this matter is true, then perhaps I will think that your current progress in cultivation is related to my brother, because it can also be said that from then on, you were already my brother's direct disciple. Jing Liuli's eyebrows slowly rose. She felt that Fang Xiang's words were very offensive, but Ding Ning only listened calmly and did not respond. My brother will know if this matter is true when he comes back and asks. Fang Xiang looked at Ding Ning and said. Ding Ning glanced at him and said, maybe he will never return to Chongling, or maybe you will not be here when he returns. Hearing such an answer, Fang Xiang's smile faded, but he was not angry. He looked seriously at Ding Ning and said, as long as you believe that from that day on, my brother taught you the method to cultivate, you will not be angry. Then this matter will always be true. Jing Liuli stilled. She had not expected Fang Xiang to say such a thing. Ding Ning did not immediately answer. He looked up again and looked at Fang Xiang, who seemed to have shrunk in size. He said seriously, the result may be terrible. Fang Xiang smiled self-deprecatingly and looked down at himself. How much worse can it be? Ding Ning looked at him and nodded. He did not say anything else. My gift to you will be in the carriage. Fang Xiang did not seem to have any more energy to waste. He said with a lowered head. Ding Ning looked at him and narrowed his eyes slightly. He had some new ideas in his mind, but he did not say anything. He just stood up, bowed, and turned to leave. The carriage was the same one that had brought them here, but there was a black metal box on the cushioned seat. Ding Ning opened this unlocked metal box. There was a thin book inside. What did he give you? Jing Liuli could not help but ask softly. Some other secret swords of Fangho province and some of his and Fang Xiumu's experiences on methods and sword moves, Ding Ning said without looking up. Jing Liuli stilled. Then she finally understood the meaning of the two's conversation. After a few breaths, she understood more. She turned to look at Ding Ning. When you challenged Taoist Qian, did you use that borrowing sword essence to purposefully create such a situation? Was this part of your plan from the start? Or rather, you had many ways to kill Taoist Qian, but among those methods, you deliberately chose to use this borrowing sword essence as the opening? There are not so many coincidences in the world. Ding Ning glanced at her and said. Then he slowly said, I only know that Fangho province must regret not choosing me in the past. Jing Liuli was silent for a moment and said, the details of the plan are perfect. Ding Ning did not look at her and continued to read the thin book in his hand. He said softly, I must quickly understand many things inside. When I face Palace Attendant Rong, I must use some of the things inside to kill her. This book did not reach my hands today, but the day Fang Xiumu came to see me. So I need to appear familiar with some of the things inside. Chapter 382. In this drama of midsummer, there seemed to be more and more interesting plots. That trusted palace attendant of the Empress who had always lived in seclusion had a secret lover in an ordinary tea garden. The wine shop youth that everyone thought had no background actually seemed to be inextricably linked to the Fong Marquis estate. Some news would spread very quickly if it was deliberately spread. Soon, more than half of Chongling knew the truth. Many of Ding Ning's neighbors who lived in Falling Parasol at the time confirmed it. Before Ding Ning entered White Goat Cave to cultivate, Fong Xiumu had interacted with Ding Ning. In the investigation files of the Divinity Bureau back then, it only stated that Fong Xiumu had come to Falling Parasol to see Ding Ning. But who knew if Fong Xiumu's seeing was just on the surface or something he had done in secret? Ever since the Yuan Wu Emperor indicated for Fong Xiumu to follow before the Deer Mountain Conference and Fong Xiumu left Chongling, many powerful cultivators of Chongling started to feel that the strongest person in Fong Ho Province was not Fong Xiang, but the cultivation maniac of Fong Ho Province, Fong Xiumu. Did Fong Xiumu really teach him something? But I feel it is not so. But if not, how can he explain the borrowing sword essence of Fong Ho Province? Xie Changxing stood in front of the green window and muttered to himself in confusion. Then he could not help but turn to look at the middle-aged cultivator in green robes standing behind him. This middle-aged cultivator looked back at him speechlessly. He thought, "You are Ding Ning's best friend. If you do not understand, how can I understand? He actually wants me to do something like this." It seems his battle with palace attendant Rong is coming soon. Unable to get an answer, Xie Changxing sighed and stretched his right hand out of the window. Shreds of paper flew from his fingertips like snow. "It's a pity that I'm still heavily injured, so I can't watch your battle with my own eyes." Hearing Xie Changxing's first words, the eyes of the middle-aged cultivator dressed in Min Mountain Sword Sect's indigo robes flashed with hope. But when he heard Xie Changxing's next words, even though he was used to great storms, he could not help but gape. How could there be such a shameless person in the world? Seriously injured? How could his injuries be serious? He had shamelessly stayed in Min Mountain Sword Sect for so long, wanting to secretly learn from them every day, and he still wanted to stay, thinking of what a certain sect uncle had said, that being so thick-skinned was a skill. This middle-aged cultivator could not help but shake his head. He did not feel any anger, but frowned slightly. "You are one of Ding Ning's best friends. Since you feel that his duel with palace attendant Rong is near, do you really not want to come out of Min Mountain Sword Sect to watch? With your," he originally wanted to say, "with your shamelessness, even if you left Min Mountain Sword Sect, you could find an excuse to come back. Even Sect Master Bailey seemed to have tacitly approved of you, but thinking that it was inappropriate to say such words, he didn't say them out loud in the end." Xie Changxing had interacted with the Min Mountain Sword Sect teachers in this hall for a long time and was familiar with their personalities. He had guessed what he was going to say, but he smiled and did not blush at all. He said matter-of-factly, "I am not worried. In any case, it will end with Ding Ning winning. I am not even interested in betting in the underground gambling houses for such a matter without any suspense." This Min Mountain Sword Sect teacher who admired Ding Ning was slightly worried and said, "The difference in cultivation is too great." Xie Changxing glanced sideways at him and said, "This matter is harder than winning the Min Mountain Sword trials, harder than forcing that palace attendant to this extent, harder than inexplicably cultivating for such a short time and almost reaching Realm 5. Hearing Xie Changxing's rapid words, this Min Mountain Sword Sect teacher stilled and immediately felt it was reasonable. Xie Changxing turned to look out the window at the Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivators practicing the sword in the valley. He smiled proudly and said, "Also, this person had no obstacles in his previous breakthroughs." If you tell me now that he went from Realm 4 to Realm 5 and completed his breakthrough in the blink of an eye, I will not be shocked. This middle-aged Min Mountain Sword sect teacher paled. Following these words, he unconsciously thought, if there were no obstacles in a breakthrough, then such a cultivator was too terrifying. There had never been one in the history books. Chanling and even the entire Qin dynasty and the world. For all cultivators, the time taken to break through was always more than the time taken to cultivate in the previous realm, because the true difficulty was always to explore the invisible world ahead, to sense the rules of an unfamiliar world, to sense the unknown energy world, and not the accumulation of physical strength and vital energy. Dripping water could penetrate stone. This was something that all stupid people would do. What determined some people to be above Realm 7 and others to stay in Realm 3 and 4 for their entire lives was the ability to discover new worlds. If a new world could be seen at a glance without any obstacles, what kind of genius was that? What kind of realm could he reach in the end? The more this Min Mountain Sword sect teacher thought, the more terrifying and incredulous he felt. His body started to tremble. With a buzzing sound, a sword light shone from the top of his head, illuminating the entire green room with an emerald green hue. Xie Changxing's reply had been sent back to Chanling. When the Guanzhong Xie family started to move again, many Chanling people who sensed this tensed up again. These people felt that this matter was about to end. If Palace Attendant Rong did not die, then Ding Ning of Ink Garden would die. But even though Ding Ning had done so many things, humiliated Palace Attendant Rong, and made her truly alone, Palace Attendant Rong still lived deep in the Imperial Palace. Even those things did not force Palace Attendant Rong out. Then what method did Ding Ning have to force Palace Attendant Rong out of the palace? Jing Liuli's most important matter in Chanling these days was to observe Ding Ning. She knew better than Xie Changxing that the curtain was about to fall on this great show. Especially this morning, when Ding Ning did not cultivate in his little courtyard, but walked towards the highest hill in Ink Garden with an aura that she found unfamiliar. But she could not think of where the straw that broke the camel's back was. Ding Ning came to the top of the hill that was Ink Garden. There was a pavilion high up. Back then, the patriarch of the Zhou family and Shui Wangshu had drunk tea here. Ding Ning looked at the table where the tea table should have been and was silent for a long time. Then he walked out of the pavilion to the front platform. He looked down at all of Ink Garden and then in the direction of the Imperial Palace. In reality, some matters are not as complicated as imagined. He turned to look at Jing Liuli, who was following behind him, and slowly said, "When I thought it through, I felt it was so simple. When I did not, I felt there was no solution. The straw that broke the camel's back came from myself." After saying this, he raised his head and looked up at the sky. Jing Liuli suddenly sensed something. While she knew something like this could happen, in this moment her face turned ashen and her breathing stopped. A fresh presence spread out of Ding Ning's body and flowed down the hill like mercury. Primal energies of the universe cheerfully came from the sky and gathered into Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's body boomed. His eyes seemed to grow several times brighter. A white cloud energy strangely appeared above this little hill like the tail of a white fairy. Many people outside Ink Garden saw this and felt shock and disbelief. But this was just the beginning. The last flower remnant sword at Ding Ning's waist started to light up. Ding Ning's hand did not move. He did not remove the sword hilt, but countless fine white flowers started to bloom on the last flower remnant sword. Then, the broken sword flew up into the air without any hindrance. Many fine flowers fell from the sky. Many people saw the sword light that soared into the sky, full of unyielding sword will. This sword light charged into the white clouds above. There was a soft pop. It was like a bubble had burst. He has a breakthrough. Without needing to think, this word appeared in many people's minds. Then there was a roar like a boulder rolling down a mountain. Then there was thunder and drums. Then the white clouds turned into black clouds. Then the sky was wet. Jing Liuli's breathing still stopped as she looked at the sky. An ink scroll seemed to have been pulled open in the sky. The entire sky seemed to have turned into an ink scroll. Countless lines of rain started to fall. Even the lines of rain were black and white. Countless people looked up in shock at the scene above Ink Garden. In the scene, the sword light was still flashing and flying through the lines of rain. That was a flying sword. Ding Ning's flying sword. Realm 5. Ding Ning has reached Realm 5. He can control a flying sword after reaching Realm 5. Why is it like this? Soft voices gathered into a flood and even reached Jing Liuli's ears in Ink Garden. Jing Liuli started to have difficulty breathing. She finally understood what the last straw was. Ding Ning's breakthrough. Ding Ning's performance was the straw that broke Palace Attendant Rong's last line of defense. Chapter 383. The black and white rain shrouded all of Ink Garden unrealistically. In the different streets of Chongling, many young geniuses looked up at the rain, their eyes filled with a kind of fanatical worship. In a distant turret that appeared blinding and white in the sunlight, Huang Jinwei and Emo Shouqing's eyes were filled with emotion and shock. The old man, whose hair fluttered like ginseng whiskers, withdrew his gaze from the black and white rain and looked at the nearby streets. He seemed to catch the fanatical gazes of these young people and sighed softly, just like in the past. Huang Jinwei's breathing paused slightly. He knew the meaning of Emo Shouqing's words. Only when that person appeared out of nowhere and competed in Chongling would such a gaze appear in the eyes of all the young people in Chongling. Ever since that person died, the young people of Chongling never had such a look in their eyes again. Huang Jinwei and the old man who actually controlled all the turrets were not the only ones looking at the rain from the turret. In the cultivation grounds of the Chongling Imperial Palace, the master of Endless Palace, Pan Rui, was also looking at Ink Garden from a turret. She had always admired Ding Ning. In the countless dynasties of the past, in the records of the cultivation world, the fastest record was Realm 5 in 3 years. Ding Ning had a breakthrough at such a speed, and used his flying sword to display the sword essences of the Ink Garden Remnant Scroll. This undoubtedly refreshed the knowledge of all cultivators, and broke the record of the cultivation world. But today, when she saw the rain in Ink Garden, for some reason, she did not feel any joy. She knew that some things would have an outcome, but she could not help but think that maybe Palace Attendant Rong's outcome, no matter if it was good or bad, it could be her own outcome in the future. There were many small hills outside Ink Garden that were not close. One of the hills was located within a very large mansion. At this time, in a pavilion on this small hill, there was a figure like a mountain of flesh. Only Mount Hung Marquis Su could give people the feeling of a mountain with such a fat figure. Of the 13 marquises of the Qin dynasty, only a few would often live in Chongling, and Mount Hung Marquis Su almost never left Chongling. Is a palace made more important than the whole world? The mountain-like figure swayed a little, as if he was shaking his head with a sigh. The entire hill seemed to tremble along with his body. Bai Shanshui and Yi Siling were also looking in the direction of Ink Garden. The two of them were the most sensitive to Chongling's water energy. At this time, they knew the cause of the change in the air above Ink Garden. This is really a good rain. Bai Shanshui couldn't help but laugh. Countless people looked in the direction of Ink Garden. Many palace attendants, and guards along the way saw her, but were only surprised. They did not understand why she, who had decided to stay in the imperial palace, would walk out. She did not stop. Just like usual, no one dared to stop her. Before many people could react, she left the palace gates and walked into the streets of Chongling. This black and white rain did not last long. When the fine white flowers disappeared in the air, the last flower remnant sword landed with a slight hum next to Ding Ning. Ding Ning looked at the last flower remnant sword that seemed to tremble in excitement. He felt very satisfied. "Let's go," he said softly to Jing Liuli. "Don't drive." Jing Liuli instinctively prepared a carriage. But when she saw Ding Ning walk out of his little courtyard, he did not walk towards the carriage she had prepared. He shook his head at her and walked out. Then she saw the long worm that Ding Ning had stuffed into the long box on his back. She stilled. "Why is this worm like this?" Ding Ning turned to look at her and said, "You will know in the future." Jing Liuli had predicted this answer before he spoke, so she naturally pressed her lips together and did not speak. Ding Ning walked out of Ink Garden. Outside Ink Garden, Yi Zhengnen stood with his head bowed. Previously, each time Jing Liuli and Ding Ning left Ink Garden, he would only watch as they left. He organized everything in Ink Garden like a true handyman. But today, when he saw Ding Ning's figure walk out, he naturally followed. He followed Jing Liuli and was dozens of feet away from Jing Liuli. When he saw Ding Ning's back, his heart trembled even more. Ding Ning carried an enormous black metal box on his back. Many swordsmen in Chongling like to carry sword boxes to hide their long swords. But no sword box was so large. But even though he did not know, he was certain that Ding Ning's departure today was completely different from usual. Ding Ning also walked into the streets of Chongling. While countless people's gazes were gathered on him, he was familiar with the streets of Chongling and moved quickly through the alleys. So he, Jing Liuli, and Yi Zhengnen quickly disappeared from the sight of most people. The shock was still spreading through Chongling. What followed was the news that palace attendant Rong and Ding Ning had left the imperial palace and Ink Garden, respectively. Then more and more people in Chongling learned that palace attendant Rong and Ding Ning had walked separately into the streets of Chongling. They did not know where they were going or where they would meet. Chapter 384. Palace attendant Rong walked quickly. She casually passed through a farm and changed her robes. Usually, it was easy for her to find the tracks of a person in Chongling, but it was difficult for other people to find her as long as she was fast enough. So when she kept walking, almost everyone was just a step behind her, and only knew where she had gone. She passed through a deserted courtyard. There had been a tall stage outside the courtyard. Now, the top of the stage was gone. The stairs of the stage had rotted, and the stage was covered in broken tiles and weeds. She saw that person and his brothers here. She admired them and wanted to become one of them. Then she finally had a chance to become a retainer of the Jiaodong Commandery Zheng family and the personal attendant of that perfect woman from Jiaodong Commandery. She walked past the stage and through a horse farm. The horse farm was deserted, and the weeds were growing very vigorously. There was a mass graveyard on the distant river port. She remembered that she had done the first thing she was unwilling to do here. She had purposefully delayed a military order and caused a person to die in battle. That person had been one of the people from the Bazin Kendo ground that she had admired. She did not stop. Her figure quickly appeared in a forest of apricot trees. There were 2 small bridges at the end of this forest facing in 2 different directions. She walked across one of the bridges. These were the 2 bridges she had walked across in the past. After crossing this bridge, she found that she was further and further away from the person she wanted to be, and in the end, she became someone she did not like. She took a detour and arrived at a bustling market. This place was filled with shops that sold goods from the north and south. They used bamboo poles to hold up shading cloths. Even in the summer, it was very busy, giving off the smell of salted fish, salted meat, and seasonings. The thick stench could not mask the scent of blood that entered her mind. She thought of the day 3 years before the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne. This was a millstone of blood and flesh. Countless flying swords in the sky were easily snapped like arrows and fell into the thick, bloody mud. The corpses of Realm 4 and 5 cultivators were piled up like ordinary soldiers. All the buildings here had been reduced to dust. Every sword light brought with it mountainous waves of blood and over 100 pieces of corpses flying in all directions, like a giant boat moving in the waves. Most of the people she had seen on the stage had died here. She watched from afar. She didn't know if she felt lucky or afraid. She couldn't stand up. She sat on the ground and trembled. Eventually, her body became cold. After that, she became cold and unfeeling. She followed the young miss from Jiaodong Commandery back then and never felt terror. She knew that she had completely become the Empress' shadow. Palace attendant Rong looked at her own shadow. The shadow was very lonely. There was only one shadow. She had already walked along the riverbank and was not far from the tea garden. Back then, she had walked here coldly and blankly and met that serene tea master. He did not know her identity and only thought that she was a student of a cultivation place who had lost her way here, or a lucky survivor of a family in Chongling. He took her in. But why was he not here in the end? She ignored the mud and sat down on the riverbank, facing the tea garden. She hugged her head and started to tremble like she had that day when she saw the mountain of corpses. She felt as though she had returned to that time. She didn't know why, but her mind was as clear as before. She thought of all the things Ding Ning had done to her. She thought of everything that had happened in the last few days. She felt a sense of familiarity, but she thought of all the places she had walked just now, and the 2 bridges. She quickly stood up again. She walked towards the streets of Chongling and started to search for Ding Ning, who was moving through Chongling. Jing Lioli followed quietly behind Ding Ning like a servant girl. Yi Zhengnan followed quietly behind Ding Ning. Ding Ning moved through the streets faster than Palace attendant Rong, and he would take many shortcuts. But he would also make some short stops in some places. The first place he stopped was a nameless alley. There was a broken stone stele next to an ordinary farmer's yard covered in moss. Ding Ning stopped and opened the metal box on his back. As a sword essence flowed out of the metal box, the moss on the stone stele lost a patch, revealing a neat cut. Then an almost indiscernible sword essence returned to Ding Ning's metal box like a current of air. Jing Lioli and Yi Zhengnan's breathing suddenly stopped. They sensed that faint and unfathomable sword essence. Their instincts told them that they could not understand. It only meant that it was too high and not on the same level. But Ding Ning's actions allowed them to understand what Ding Ning was doing, especially Jing Lioli. She could not believe that Ding Ning could master such a sword manual in such a short time. Ding Ning continued to walk through the streets. He walked past a patch of mottled ancient walls. Some of the white dust on the ancient walls had fallen off, revealing some marks that people would not be able to see even if they came later. He walked past a wide stone path where many carriages and horses traveled. Some dust shot out of the cracks in the stone ground. He walked past a vegetable garden. In the storm last summer, when Yi Siling returned and fought with Zhao Zhan of the Zhao Sword Furnace, a wave of sword energy had destroyed this vegetable garden. Other than Jing Lioli and Yi Zhengnan, even some of the cultivators who had been following him could not sense this presence because they were not close enough. In the eyes of all of them, Ding Ning had ultimately chosen a very short cut and walked towards a guild hall. That meeting hall was called Hanging Pot Hall. It was a very large medical hall. Of all the medical halls in Chongling, it was the second best medical hall. As Ding Ning appeared in front of this medical hall, many people realized that this medical hall had been reserved by the Guanzhong Xie family. The master of Hanging Pot Hall, Sun Xingtang, was one of the most famous doctors in Chongling. He was from Guangzhou. When Ding Ning came to the gates of Hanging Pot Hall, this old man in his 70s was already waiting in front of the door. "You have entered Realm 5. Looking at Ding Ning, who greeted him calmly, the old man returned the greeting and said slowly with unusual solemnity, "There has never been a cultivator who entered Realm 5 so quickly, so you cannot have any mishaps." "I understand your meaning." Ding Ning smiled and said, "You hope that I will not be in a hurry. But if people always think that they cannot be in a hurry, they will be slow. Maybe in the future, it will be a different person." The old man stilled slightly and then bowed. "Seriously, I do not understand cultivation as well as you, but your words make me feel that they are reasonable." Ding Ning bowed again and returned the greeting. "Thank you for your trouble, elder." The old man nodded and returned to the medical hall that had been bustling in the past, but was very quiet today. Most of the doctors had been dismissed. Ding Ning stopped. He put down the metal box on his back and simply put it behind his back. Then he stood silently at the door of the medical hall and looked at the road ahead. Seeing him stop completely, everyone started to understand that he was waiting here for Palace Attendant Rome. Jing Liuli and Yi Zhengnan exchanged a look. They were even more certain that Ding Ning would not leave after stopping here. So the two of them walked behind Ding Ning in the shadows behind the door of Hanging Pot Hall. Thunder inexplicably roared in the sky. There were no black clouds, but it seemed like someone was beating the drums for the upcoming show. There were no black clouds in the sky, but a patch of black clouds floated out of the alley on the side. Everyone on that side fearfully surged in another direction. Many people in Chongling would use umbrellas to block the sun, but no one's umbrella would be so black. Looking at the densely packed black umbrellas, everyone knew that the bureau chief of the astrology bureau, Yi Xiling, had arrived. There was a stone bridge not far from the guild hall. A carriage stopped by the stone bridge. The carriage was ordinary, but it had a dark and moldy presence that caused many cultivators to not dare to pass by. Chapter 385. The bureau chief of the astrology bureau, Yi Xiling, had arrived. The chief inspector Chen of the divinity bureau had also arrived. He even saw a carriage belonging to the Fong Marquis estate. Inside should be Fong Xiang, whose cultivation was crippled. There were many important people mixed in the crowd, including many peerless experts of Min Mountain Sword sect. But Mo Shouqing, who had been paying close attention to Ding Ning and had not missed any of Ding Ning's battles, did not appear. Huang Jinwei did not understand. He even started to worry that something was wrong with Mo Shouqing's body. More and more people flooded towards the alley where Ding Ning was. The center of gravity of all of Chongling seemed to be leaning towards this place. Not just because Ding Ning was the winner of the Min Mountain Sword Trials, not just because this was a great show with enough foreplay, but even more importantly, this was a battle of realms. In the memories of many Chongling cultivators, even that person had only said that there was no difference between realms 4 and below. But now, Ding Ning was realm 5, and that palace attendant Rome was realm 6. If a realm 5 could defeat a realm 6, this was enough to change everyone's understanding. The path in front of Ding Ning was completely blocked. However, the people holding black umbrellas had surrounded the empty space in front of the clinic where the carriages were parked. Thus, the space in front of Ding Ning still appeared empty. there was an unusual disturbance in the crowd. The black umbrellas suddenly parted to let a young person who looked slightly older than Ding Ning walk in. Ding Ning smiled warmly and then bowed slightly to this person. This person was Su Hashan. After greeting Ding Ning, he said seriously, "They are still studying in Min Mountain Sword Sect, so I am here." Hearing this, Jing Liuli's eyebrows rose slightly. She knew that they Su Hashan spoke of were Xie Changsheng and the other friends of Ding Ning. Su Hashan was their representative. While only Su Hashan had come, his words meant that these young people were still on Ding Ning's side. Thunder roared in the sky. The weather was hot, and many people were gathered together. Many people found it difficult to bear the heat and almost fainted. Strange ripples appeared in the crowd in the distance. Many people cried out in surprise, which made people feel refreshed. A woman with a cold expression, dressed in the robes of an ordinary peasant woman, slowly passed through the crowd. Most people did not recognize this woman, but looking at the reactions and gazes of the surrounding people and sensing the unusual presence this woman gave off, everyone knew that this woman was that palace attendant Rome. Because of her unique identity, the significance of this battle, and the special aura she was emitting at this moment, although the crowd on both sides was already very congested, they still unconsciously moved to the sides to avoid her. The crowd in front of her parted like the tide, and the road became even wider. Most people wanted to see the result of this battle. Yet, some people did not want to see this battle occur. A middle-aged man dressed in ordinary robes did not move aside. Looking at palace attendant Rome, who came close to him, he nodded slightly and said softly, "Please do not be like this. I think the Empress does not want this. And then palace attendant Rome looked expressionlessly at the middle-aged man and walked past him. The middle-aged man stilled and did not know what palace attendant Rome meant. Palace attendant Rome's cold voice reached his ears. "Then wait for him to reach realm 6 or 7, and then kill me? Then all I can do is wait in the imperial palace for the day he comes to kill me?" The middle-aged man could not answer. For him, when he mentioned the Empress, palace attendant Rome did not turn her head. He could not answer. After this, no one stopped her. The streets and alleys went from noisy to silent. Even those people who felt they were about to faint from the heat started to have patience. Palace attendant Rome walked to the edge of the black umbrella. The shadow of the black umbrella covered her face and made it impossible to see her emotions. Then the black umbrella parted. She walked over and appeared in Ding Ning's sight. Ding Ning looked calmly at palace attendant Rome, who was coming closer, and said coldly, "I want to challenge you." His voice was not loud at this time, but it seemed to spread to all the streets and alleys in this area, causing many people to tremble. Palace attendant Rome slowly looked up. She looked silently at Ding Ning, the blood on her lips growing. Then she shook her head and said, "This time, it is not you who wants to challenge me, but I want to challenge you." The sound of heavy breathing could be heard from the sea of people around them. Many people had guessed what the two of them would say when they finally met here, but no one had guessed that it would be like this at the beginning. While many people were still shocked, speechless, Ding Ning smiled in satisfaction. "I accept your challenge." Then he put away his smile and said seriously to palace attendant Rome. Palace attendant Rome looked at him, her expression strange. Then she said, "He did not leave behind the words in the tea garden. You speak of the row of white bone words?" Ding Ning looked coolly at palace attendant Rome and said, "If he did not leave it, he may have told others." Even more importantly, no one knows what that date represents. Also, is there any meaning in saying this now? Chapter 386. The accumulated dust blew out of the cracks in the stone path. In the eyes of many people, they were large and long swords arranged in front of palace attendant Rome. Many of the cultivators who had come today were hidden experts who rarely left their sections. At this time, their expressions changed slightly and they narrowed their eyes. They had underestimated this palace attendant Rong before, but now they knew they were wrong. This palace attendant Rong was an old person in Chongling. She had experienced the most glorious and bloodiest era. Also, the cultivators she had seen were the top cultivators of their time. She had personally experienced the prosperity of the Bazin Kendo Ground Group, and also saw the demise of the Bazin Kendo Ground. Perhaps she had also handled many top-notch sword manuals. Her actions reminded all the cultivators that people with such experiences were destined to be extraordinary, just like how any retainer or carriage driver under those people in the past was very powerful to the outside world. This palace attendant was also very powerful, so powerful it surpassed the boundaries of their imagination. The large, blurry swords formed from the dust gave off real murderousness. They layered like walls in front of palace attendant Rome. This was a sword formation that could both attack and defend. A sword formation like this could even split the energy surging towards palace attendant Rome into countless layers, much less flying swords. Even Huang Jinwei on the turret felt it could not be defeated. In his view, if Ding Ning wanted to defeat this palace attendant, he could only rely on flying swords. But the distance between Ding Ning and palace attendant Rong was less than 10 feet. This kind of distance was nothing to a Realm 6 cultivator. In palace attendant Rong's perception, there was no distance between her and Ding Ning. The large swords filled the space between her and Ding Ning. With her next thought, these swords would press towards Ding Ning. Compared to her sword formation, Ding Ning was like a small boat facing a storm in the ocean. Everyone felt that there was no way he could fight back, except for Jing Liuli and Yi Zhengnen, who followed behind him. Their eyes fell on the iron box behind Ding Ning. At this moment, Ding Ning opened the iron box. A sword shadow flew out of the iron box at the right time. This sword shadow was very small and light green in color, like a small piece of moss, appearing soft and powerless. This sword shadow met the sword formation that was moving towards it. Facing the first large sword, it was like a thin and soft dagger gently brushing against a wall. The thin and soft dagger scratched against the moving wall. At most, it could cut off some of the wall's ash. How could it stop the wall from moving forward? However, with just a light stroke, the entire wall was broken. This light green sword shadow silently sliced apart the first large sword that was coming at him. Gasps of disbelief could be heard. The pupils of all the cultivators who could react contracted. They did not dare to believe that this indifferent sword shadow had such power. They did not have time to react. They did not know where Ding Ning's sword shadow came from. As their gasps sounded and disbelief spread, Ding Ning gave them an answer. A sword light flew out of the iron box. Most of the people present were familiar with this broken sword, which was covered in countless fine white flowers. But in the senses of many powerful cultivators, this remnant sword was very different from usual. The color of this sword had not changed at all, but it gave them a sense of mottled feeling. There were countless flat cracks on the last flower remnant sword. These cracks formed when the sword was broken, like seal scripts that penetrated the entire sword and spread all the way to the hilt. These cracks had originally been very flat. If the sword threads had not spread, if the fine white flowers had not bloomed in the cracks, they would not have been visible. But today, in the senses of these powerful cultivators, the cracks on this sword were not flat. The sword threads seemed to have been tied into different knots to form this sword. The cracks were no longer completely flat. There were different shadows on the sword. So in the senses of these people, it became mottled. Just as the first moss-like sword shadow silently landed on the moving sword wall, A knot on the last flower remnant sword disappeared the moment it flew out of the iron box. Then a sword shadow flew out of the last flower remnant, sword like a patch of gray-white wall dust. This sword shadow that looked like gray wall ash also fell into the sword formation. It stuck to a huge sword that was pressing down, and then it crushed this huge sword. Palace attendant Rong's sword formation was enormous and had accumulated her many years of resentment and the courage to risk everything after losing everything, even her life. Compared to this sword formation, these sword shadows were still too small and weak, but the sword essences contained in these sword shadows were all powerful, so powerful they caused people to tremble. Some sword essences seemed to have the power to change the laws of energy ahead, and directly shattered the incoming sword. And there were many of these sword shadows. Mottled sword shadows were released from the last flower remnant sword one after another, stabbing towards the sword formation. There was a loud bang. An enormous fatty seemed to appear in the sword shadows. Like a mountain, he crushed the entire sword formation into chaos. Palace attendant Rong's peerless attack was defeated just like that. Borrowing sword essence. Someone reacted and cried out. However, most of the cultivators who reacted knew that the voice he shouted was wrong. Borrowing sword essence could only use vital energy to activate some remnant sword essence that had just been used. It was like simulating some presence. So this was controlling sword essence. In all of Fenghe province, supposedly, only Feng Xiumu could comprehend this secret sword, using sword seals to obtain true sword essence and use it against enemies. The knots on Ding Ning's last flower remnant sword were seals made from sword threads. So in this moment, he seemed to have borrowed the swords of many experts. For example, the sword essence that had completely crushed the sword formation caused people to think of the blow marquee Su had used against Yi Sealing on the street. Ding Ning, is he really Feng Xiumu's direct disciple? Someone could not help but shout. Palace attendant Rong's heart contracted violently. When the first sword essence flew out of the metal box behind Ding Ning, goosebumps rose on her skin. The intense shock caused her heart to bleed even more. Her lips were tender and alluring. There was a deafening boom. Her sword formation was defeated in a flash. At this time, two more powerful sword essences charged through the shattered sword formation and fell towards her body. One was the great furnace of the world. An enormous wave rose into the sky. These were the sword essences of Zhao Zhan and Yi Sealing. This was a true battle of life and death between the two, and the last blow that would decide life and death. These two sword essences appeared at the same time. They did not collide, but attacked the same enemy at the same time. There was no sound as water and fire mixed, yet when Ding Ning activated his vital energy, he brought out power that did not belong to his realm. Palace attendant Rong had no time to think. Her hands pushed forward. A presence unique to her life bond sword surged out of her palm. There was still no sound. However, an exceptionally beautiful flame bloomed in front of her. This was a glowing ball of water exploding outwards. Inside the ball of water, there were countless dazzling red lines of fire. With a muffled grunt, Palace attendant Rong's blood-red lips flew out. Her body was thrown back like a kite. The circle of black umbrellas quickly moved backwards, causing gasps due to the pressure. The area of battle had expanded. The empty space that had been given up was not enough. Fortunately, the people at the front were almost all cultivators. This kind of pressure did not cause them to fall to the ground or get trampled and cause more chaos. The ball of water exploded into countless droplets of water. The water droplets were burned by the lines of fire and turned into balls of steam. Palace attendant Rong's eyes narrowed into slits. A sword light danced in the pure, white energy and shot towards her. This was Ding Ning's last flower remnant sword, his flying sword. But at this time, Ding Ning's figure disappeared into the mist in front of her. Chapter 387. Palace attendant Rong did not pay attention to Ding Ning. The area within 30 feet of her was her world. It was absolutely impossible for Ding Ning to get within 30 feet of her without being discovered. Even more importantly, there was a great disparity in power between Ding Ning and her. Ding Ning could only use his flying sword to threaten her, so she only needed to deal with Ding Ning's flying sword. The moment she narrowed her eyes, her perception accurately captured this lightning-fast flying sword. She swung her sword. Her life-bond sword had completely formed in her hand. It was a short sword that was about 2 feet long. It was a withered yellow with a hint of burnt yellow, just like the color of a withered banana leaf in autumn. However, its surface emitted a white porcelain luster, appearing incomparably cold. When she swung her sword, a clear arc of light appeared in the air ahead of her. A wild wind suddenly surged. All the steam, including some lines of fire that had not been extinguished, were blown away. The area in front of her was clear. Ding Ning's figure was not there. Jing Liuli and Yi Zhengnen were still standing in the shadows under the eaves by the door. At this time, a faint layer of sword light stood in front of Jing Liuli, and Yi Zhengnen like a large blade, blocking the steam and lines of fire blowing towards them. Ding Ning's figure was not in front of them, nor was the large metal box. No one knew if Ding Ning had retreated to the courtyard behind him or hidden in the surrounding streets. But the flying sword with fine white flowers blooming on the sword threads was still in the air. This remnant sword was like a dragonfly in the wild wind, swaying and about to fall. Palace attendant Rong had finished one attack. If she swung her life-bond sword again, Ding Ning's flying sword would be sent flying to an unknown location. But in this moment, the sound of something hard breaking sounded. This sound came from behind Palace attendant Rong. All the spectating cultivators looked in shock and puzzlement behind Palace attendant Rong. While it was summer, pieces of shattered ice and snow exploded behind Palace attendant Rong. Thump, 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 thump. Palace attendant Rong landed forward. The soles of her shoes hit the ground and caused cloth to fly up. After a few steps, she stopped. Her feet were stuck in a pile of rubble, and 2 deep ravines appeared behind her. The clothes on her back were also torn. A few drops of blood hung on the torn cloth under the sunlight, looking very sparkling and dazzling. Most people couldn't understand what had happened in that instant, and they let out a series of exclamations. Palace attendant Rong frowned, coughed softly, and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. There was a light cracking sound when the blinding light dissipated, and everyone could see again. Waves of gasps sounded. A shallow wound appeared on the left side of Palace attendant Rong's abdomen. Blood was slowly flowing out. Palace attendant Rong's left foot was raised, and a layer of vital energy seeped out of her right foot, lifting her body off the ground. This sudden wound caused her to grunt. For the first time, she felt pain on her face. The flying sword, which had already flown several feet away from her, suddenly shook. With just a tremor, several invisible waves in the air violently bombarded her body. Palace attendant Rong's body flew forward. This time, she could not control her balance and hit a wall in front of her. Ding Ning's flying sword disappeared like a ghost, charging into the spreading dust. Palace attendant Rong's figure appeared out of the dust in the next moment. Another small wound appeared on her face. All the spectating experts and even the academicians of the Astrology Bureau under the black umbrellas at the front were shocked. Winter cicada transformation, Hell Guide, Comet Tail, Corona Sword, Jade Cutting Sword, Sky Wave, Backlight Sword, Dust Concealment, one secret sword after another. Everyone could imagine that Ding Ning would use his flying sword to deal with palace attendant Rome. Yet no one had expected Ding Ning to use his flying sword so well. It was one secret sword after another that seemed to never stop. Ordinary flying sword arts either pursued lightning-fast speed, strangeness, or concealment. For a cultivator who had just grasped the flying sword, it was already very difficult to be outstanding in any of these, let alone a flying sword's secret art that could trigger the unique power of energy. What shocked these cultivators the most was that these flying sword secret arts did not come from the same sect. The Winter Cicada transformation came from Min Mountain Sword Sect. The Hell Guide was the sword essence of the Zhao. The Comet Tail was the sword essence of the former Han. The Jade Cutting Sword came from the Fong Marquisate establishment. These flying sword secret arts that came from different cultivation places were perfectly displayed in the hands of one person who had just entered Realm 5. If they had not seen this with their own eyes, they would not have believed it even if it reached their ears. Palace attendant Rome's wounds were very small. All these cultivators knew that these wounds could not pose any real threat to her. However, the blood that flowed out from these wounds also caused the clothes on her body to become scarlet red. She already looked miserable. Even more importantly, this flying sword had been facing palace attendant Rong from beginning to end. Now, she could not even see Ding Ning. These spectating cultivators even started to sympathize with this palace attendant. They unconsciously wondered if she would be slowly killed by Ding Ning's flying sword without seeing Ding Ning's shadow from beginning to end. At this time, palace attendant Rong looked up. Her face was pale, but her lips were so bloody they seemed to drip blood. "You think you can defeat me like this?" There was no pain in her voice at all, only coldness. Chapter 388. From the start of the real battle, palace attendant Rong could not see Ding Ning at all. Yet she still did not feel she would lose. She only needed to find Ding Ning and appear in front of him. Then Ding Ning would die. She could withstand many more flying swords like this, but Ding Ning could not withstand one of her attacks. She looked up and started to speak towards the alley on the left. Many people under the black umbrellas shouted in shock and anger. Those black umbrellas flew up like black lotuses, landing in the dense crowd of people in the alley. Palace attendant Rong's life bond sword disappeared from her hand, but as she spoke each word, her breath carried a true life bond sword energy. It was still a cold sword energy that flashed with a porcelain sheen. Streaks of sword chi flew towards the alley that her gaze was locked on and landed on it. The straight sword energies were originally small, but when they landed from the sky, they attracted primal energies of the universe and formed even smaller sword energies. These sword chis fell on the streets and alleys, and nothing could escape. The roof tiles were cut, the walls were cut, and some dogs and cats that had just sensed danger were cut into pieces. The sword energies did not stop after landing on the ground. They cut deep into the ground and created white waves of energy. Terrified screams accompanied the angry shouts of the cultivators under the black umbrellas. Waves of air flew out from the surface of the black umbrella, trying their best to protect the panicking commoners. The white waves of energy were still charging upwards. Palace attendant Rong's figure appeared in the white waves. She stood on top of the ruins, standing in the midst of the panicked crowd. Her figure appeared exceptionally cold and powerful, yet the confidence in her eyes had disappeared. How is this possible? She cried out involuntarily. Many cultivators felt the same as her. Some cultivators who did not know each other, but felt the other's cultivation were similar, could not help but look at each other, wanting to see the answer in each other's eyes. When the flying sword had used so many astounding secret swords, they finally sensed the presence of the imperial envoy from the chaotic energy. They also believed that Ding Ning was in that area. Even if Ding Ning could travel underground, he could not hide his tracks under palace attendant Rong's sword. However, Ding Ning was not there. Where was Ding Ning? Then, to the bewilderment and shock of these cultivators, they found that Ding Ning's flying sword had disappeared as well. Just now, Palace Attendant Rong's sword energy had landed. Their attention had been focused on the shattered residences, but a flying sword just now had suddenly escaped the perception of so many people. This was almost impossible. However, Ding Ning did it. It was even hotter in the dusty ruins. Palace Attendant Rong's fingers grew colder. The flying sword also disappeared from her perception. The coldness spread from her fingertips to her entire body. This was clearly a duel of life and death, but Ding Ning had turned it into a game of hide-and-seek. She felt no fear, but she was furious. She finally decided to live one day for herself. She had risked everything to kill Ding Ning, but she feared she could not kill Ding Ning. As a result, her bright red lips finally started to bleed. She bit her lip and opened her mouth, wanting to curse out angrily. But in this moment, a cloud of dust behind her flew up. She turned, and her body naturally flew in the opposite direction of the cloud of dust. There was a soft sound. A wave of blood gushed out from her feet. What hit her feet was just a wave of white energy. This wave of white energy had been activated by her sword move just now, and did not have any lingering presence of sword essence. It had no power. However, within this white chi, there was a silent flying sword without the slightest killing intent. The flying sword quickly pierced through her left foot, and then, with a flash, disappeared into the crack under her body. The sword wound was not large, but it sinisterly cut through several important blood vessels under her feet. Blood spurted out crazily from her feet and even splattered in front of her. Palace Attendant Rong's face twisted in anger and pain, but she could not do anything. The flying sword had already disappeared from her perception. Hide-and-seek was a game that Chanling's children liked to play. Yet at this time, looking at the blood on Palace Attendant Rong's body, no one felt that this was a game. Palace Attendant Rong used vital energy to stop the bleeding with just a thought. But in this moment, she had lost a lot of blood. This was a blow that could truly threaten her. Palace Attendant Rong landed on the ground. The moment she landed, the wound on her left foot stopped bleeding. There was a layer of bright porcelain light that sealed the wounds on both sides of his body. The ground under her feet seemed to boil. Waves of powerful vital energy surged out of her fingertips. They did not fall to the ground, but charged into the sky above her head. However, the wind brought about by the wind brought all the air on the ground up, causing countless grains of sand on the ground to fly up. A sandstorm formed from the ground upwards. Each grain of sand increased in volume and grew brighter and sharper as the sandstorm blew and the grains of sand rubbed against each other. Everyone in the surrounding streets felt the heat recede, but they found it harder to breathe. All the hot air and air were drawn into the sandstorm that Palace Attendant Rong had created. There was a loud boom. The sandstorm turned red. Burning. Explosion. The scorching hot airflow carried countless sharp red sand grains, exploding outwards in all directions. Previously, when Ding Ning had used a secret sword, it had been like a rising sun, but that was just light. However, this explosion contained a huge and real power. It was like a red sun was exploding. So even from a distance, one could see the ball of fire spreading and feel the powerful energy vibrations. This was a power that even Realm 7 cultivators might not be able to display. Most Realm 7s would not use their vital energy so recklessly. Such a great disturbance. Dressed in black robes, Su Fanqin immediately sensed the energy vibrations. He raised an eyebrow and said in surprise, on the river, Bai Shanshui was still looking at him patiently. He and Bai Shanshui had encountered each other for a long time. The bamboo hat on his head had shattered into countless threads a few minutes ago, but these threads were still floating above his head. For him, and by Shan Shui, time seemed to have stopped in this space. There was a rumbling sound. Thunder roared in the sky, but unlike the clear sky and dry thunder from before, dark clouds appeared in the sky above Chongling with this roar of thunder. A moist presence floated over from the distance. Bai Shanshui suddenly smiled at him. A wave of water vapor floated up from the river behind her. Su Fanqin's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly understood that Bai Shanshui was not attacking because she was waiting for a weakness, but for a chance like this. Waiting for a weakness and waiting for a chance to attack were completely different for people like him. And by Shan Shui, the former meant that she was wary of his power, and the latter was waiting for a chance to kill him. His confidence suddenly disappeared like palace attendant Rong when she could not find Ding Ning's figure in the sand. With a loud shout, the countless bamboo strands floating above his head brought out countless streams of air and flew outwards, instantly interweaving into a large talisman. The black longsword spinning around his body started to spin furiously. The black sword light completely wrapped around his body and turned into a black top. It was different from palace attendant Rong, who was in a hurry to kill Ding Ning. This was Chongling. If he was not killed by Shan Shui in a short time, the one to die would be by Shan Shui. It rained around the hanging pot hall. As the rain fell, the figure of a white-robed woman appeared in the black umbrella. This white-clothed woman looked like a very delicate young girl, but when most cultivators saw this figure, they naturally felt a strong sense of reverence. The rain with powerful Realm 7 presence fell from the sky and landed in the streets. It protected the terrified ordinary people and some weak cultivation students, but did not stop the explosion of energy and sand from spreading. It just formed a large net outside the battlefield. Fiery red energy and sand danced in the air. A residence on the right collapsed first, revealing Ding Ning's figure. Chapter 389. A thread of blood seeped out of Jing Liuli's lips. Jing Liuli bit her lip, but she did not detect it. She was very nervous. When she had presided over the Min Mountain Sword trials, those students, including Ding Ning, had been in danger, but she had not felt any nervousness. But now it was different. This was a true battle of life and death. Both sides only had the goal of killing the other. No one would interfere. Also corresponding to Ding Ning and Palace Attendant Rong's cultivation. If Ding Ning was exposed to Palace Attendant Rong's sight and perception, it meant death. Playing hide-and-seek with me? Palace Attendant Rong's vital energy was greatly expended. Some of the wounds on her body started to bleed again, but a crazy smile appeared on her face. You cannot hide now, right? She was an old person of Chongling, and one of the people closest to the Bazin Kendo ground back then. She would only think of it when she saw it, and learn it when she thought of it. Many of the strongest cultivators of Chongling in the future were usually the people closest to the top experts of the Bazin Kendo ground back then. So the sword manual that Palace Attendant Rong cultivated was extraordinary, and a secret sword that ordinary cultivation places could not imagine. But as the crazy smile spread across her face, waves of crazy sword essences came out of her mouth with powerful life bond presence. Ding Ning started to cough blood. Dust was still swirling around him. Palace Attendant Rong's sword essences had not truly landed, but the energy pressure was almost unbearable. His feet touched the ground and uncontrollably slid backwards. The soles of his feet seemed to be burning. The cold murderousness in the air was so strong that even some Realm 7 experts in the crowd, who were stronger than Palace Attendant Rong, were shocked. So a person's murderousness could be so strong and powerful. This was the sword essence of the Heaven Hatred Sword Manual. The emotions accumulated over many years with the strongest hatred created unimaginable murderousness. Streaks of sword chi, shining with porcelain sword light, fell on Ding Ning's body. The air in front of these sword chis turned black. The rubble around Ding Ning kept exploding, turning into fine powder. Then they were pressed together by the powerful impact, forming some terrifying black strips. This was the difference in absolute power. It was impossible for Ding Ning to block such a sword strike. Even Jing Liuli felt that Ding Ning would not be able to block such a strike. Everyone felt that Ding Ning could not stop Palace Attendant Rong's attack, just like how everyone felt from the start of the battle that a Realm 5 could not win against a Realm 6. However, everyone hoped to see a miracle. Then, Ding Ning made everyone see a miracle. He was already coughing up blood, but his expression remained calm. A presence in his body, under the pressure of a powerful force, entered the metal box behind him with difficulty but accuracy. The surface of the metal box was already covered in scorch marks after being burned by the fiery red smoke and scalding sand. However, at this moment, these scorch marks suddenly turned black, so black that it was as if there was ink flowing out from them. The metal box gave off a faint and distant presence. The moment this presence came out, Ding Ning stopped coughing blood, and his breathing calmed. The powerful pressure from the sword chi had all disappeared. Many pure white rays of light came out of the cracks in the metal box without any impurities. Even the sword chi showed signs of stopping. It was as if a white scroll had suddenly unfurled in the world around Ding Ning, imprisoning everything within. Everyone was shocked, speechless. Even Wang Jinwei, on the closest turret, widened his eyes in shock. He did not understand what the metal box behind Ding Ning was that had such a powerful presence. Palace Attendant Rong's breathing stopped, not because of shock, but because the air in front of her had almost frozen. Under everyone's disbelieving gazes, the ink on the surface of the metal box faded. An ink scroll flew out of the metal box behind him. There was a rumbling sound. There was a muffled thunder in the sky. The entire sky turned into the color of an ink painting, black and white. Palace Attendant Rong's body shook violently, and blood seeped out of her ears. A sword light appeared in the black and white sky like a bolt of lightning. This was Ding Ning's flying sword that had been hidden somewhere. A heavy rain fell. Countless lines of rain with sharp sword essence fell, creating splashes several feet away from Palace Attendant Rong. They were unable to cause true damage to her, but caused her sword energy to almost stop in the air. The burning sun in the sky was covered by black clouds. A white crescent moon formed. All the lines of rain started to freeze, turning the pure white lines into blue-black ice. All the spectators outside the arena felt a chill. The ice started to shatter, and then many cold and fiendish sword energies appeared. They danced and cut at Palace Attendant Rong's sword energy. Palace Attendant Rong's body started to tremble violently. The porcelain-like energy around her started to sway. Then she started to cough up blood. It is the remnant scroll of the Zhou family ink garden. Many people finally came to their senses and cried out in surprise. Jing Liuli finally recovered her breathing and felt some pain from her broken lips. The remnant scroll of the Zhou family ink garden was famous in Chongling, but no one had ever thought that a cultivator could use this to fight like this. Yet Ding Ning's miracle did not stop. He looked up. The flying sword in the sky was suddenly covered in blue-black ice and drew a long arc in the air. That arc was like all the missing parts of a crescent moon, filling the crescent moon perfectly. There was a loud boom. All of the energy around Palace Attendant Rong started to explode. The remnant scroll that flew out of the metal box behind Ding Ning started to shatter, disintegrating along each ink line. There were no flames, but the fragments flew out along the seal essence as though they were burning. At the center of the explosion, Palace attendant Rong gave a shrill and terrifying howl. Blood sprayed out of her mouth. Her body was blown off the ground by an irresistible force and fell heavily to the ground. There was another explosion. A deep hole appeared in the ground like a meteor. From the center of the deep pit shot out streaks of terrifying dust and flames, which were mixed with scarlet qi and blood. The surrounding streets were deathly silent. Palace attendant Rong slowly stood up from the center of the hole. The porcelain-like light on her body had disappeared. Her skin was covered in shocking wounds. Her face was swollen, and blood seeped out of the corner of her lips. After pausing for a breath, she once again let out a shrill and furious howl, not just because of the pain and wounds, but also because she had lost track of Dingning. The ashes of the Ink Garden remnant scroll were still floating in the air. The black ashes covered the entire sky like black snow, but the light reflected off them was like a piece of white paper. The cracks in space overlapped, making it impossible to see through them. Dingning was no longer there. Even the metal box behind him was no longer in the gravel. He did not take the chance to attack, but chose to disappear and play hide and seek with her. Just as palace attendant Rong was seriously wounded and gave a shrill and furious howl, an old man with white hair and beard was slowly walking towards the tea garden. He was the Mo Shoqing that Huang Jinwei had been worried about. Chongling had no walls, but he was one of the invisible walls of Chongling. Today, the streets were empty. All of their attention was focused on where Dingning and palace attendant Rong were fighting. Then other places would naturally be unguarded, and unusual things would easily occur. He was a true wise person, and naturally had to prepare in advance. At this time, he had sensed the killing intent of the woman from Cloudwater Palace. He was no longer high up on the turret, and chose to be close to Bai Shanshui. He did not want any more accidents, and did not want this woman to escape. The black sword light was still spinning like a top, and easily blew away all of the primal energies of the universe that landed on it. It was like hitting a real spinning top. No matter how strong the force was, it would only make the spinning top spin faster. This was an invulnerable defensive sword move. Realm 7 power could not break through. Yet looking at Su Fanqin's sword move by Shanshui, who knew that her battle with Su Fanqin would be detected by some of the top experts in Chongling, smiled brightly. In the sky, a glowing water droplet fell from the sky. When it was close to the ground, this glowing water droplet turned into a long river, a horizontal river. This long river was like a huge palm slapping down. The Black Top's power had been created at the very bottom. As the force of the attack from above descended, the power of Su Fanqin's sword force pressed down. The two enormous forces instantly tore apart the ground below, and a huge hole was instantly drilled out. There was the sound of surging water deep below. Bai Shanshui and Su Fanqin went down. Su Fanqin let out an angry roar, accompanied by Bai Shanshui's wild and unruly laughter. Chapter 390. Mo Shoqing's footsteps suddenly stopped. He was not far from Bai Shanshui and Su Fanqin. At this time, he could clearly sense Bai Shanshui and Su Fanqin's specific location. Yet he wanted to go closer, so he missed the chance to attack. He took a deep breath and let out a long sigh, looking at the strands of white hair that had fallen off his forehead and the dew that had formed on the hair due to the wetness. He thought that this short distance might be the will of the heavens. He was one of the oldest people in Chongling. He was familiar with the terrain and the shape of each building in Chongling, but he was not as familiar as Bai Shanshui with the underground water system and the crisscrossing Yin rivers. Bai Shanshui had risked her life to stay in Chongling for a long time to comprehend the lonely mountain sword horde. In the end, While she had not comprehended the true meaning of the lonely mountain sword hoard, this inexplicable gain was her familiarity with the water system of Chongling. So today, she had thrown herself and Su Fanqin into the underground river. She used this to hide her location. She had successfully prevented Mo Shouqing from capturing her figure. She had successfully played hide and seek with Mo Shouqing. The water that fell to the ground quickly evaporated in the heat. White mist shrouded the streets where Ding Ning and palace attendant Rong were surrounded by people. Yi Xiling sensed the slight vibrations in the water in the deep wells in the streets. Her expression grew more complicated. Up until now, what Ding Ning had done was a miracle. His plan from the start had not been wrong at all. Palace attendant Rong screamed shrilly. Her eyes closed. Blood stretched out like threads and flew in all directions. She started to feel the true threat of death. Because she hadn't experienced a battle like this for many years, she hadn't suffered a single injury. Therefore, at this moment, whether it was her external injuries or internal injuries, they were magnified infinitely in her perception and consciousness. Only the amount of vital energy in her body was the most real and clear. Her vital energy had been greatly expended. Yet, she had no choice at this time. She had to find Ding Ning again. The greatest secret sword of Fong, Ho Province. Ink, Garden Remnant Scroll. What other tricks do you have? I don't believe that your methods are endless. Amidst the shrill cries, many people unconsciously began to tremble. Palace attendant Rong's life bond sword strangely came out of her mouth. As she screamed, it charged high into the sky and immediately surpassed the limits of everyone's vision. Her natal sword flew to a height that no one could see, and it was still flying straight up. Palace attendant Rong looked up. Tears of blood started to flow from the corners of her eyes. At this moment, she was not worried about Ding Ning's sneak attack. She was only worried about whether or not there would be any sparks in the sky that would fly to stop them. She was worried about the decree of the noblest woman in the depths of the palace. Even her life-bond sword was exuding a strong pleading intent. She only begged her master to grant her a fair fight. Beyond the boundless void that her perception could reach, there was a twinkle of starlight, as if someone had blinked. No sparks fell. Palace attendant Rong screamed even more shrilly, but there was joy in her voice. High up in the sky, a terrifying roar resounded. Everyone looked up at the sky and saw a black shadow falling down at an unimaginable speed. This was Palace attendant Rong's flying sword. At this time, it was faster than a true meteor, so when a meteor fell, it would only leave a long tail of smoke behind it. But when her life-bond sword fell, it would cause explosions at the tip of the sword. Visible shock waves overlapped in the air. Then this flying sword smashed to the ground in front of Palace attendant Rong. The ground started to shake like waves. The crowd panicked, but Yi Xiling, who was at the front, did not act this time. None of the surrounding buildings collapsed. All the power of this sword strangely charged towards one point. There was a loud boom. Among the densely packed shops, one of them suddenly disappeared, as if it had been smashed by an invisible giant fist. All the dust flew up into the sky, turning into a pillar of smoke that soared into the sky. There was a flash of metal in the pillar of smoke. The suppressed exclamations finally erupted at this moment, turning into a frenzy. That was Ding Ning's flying sword. This sword had not been able to hit Ding Ning directly. It had only caught Ding Ning's flying sword. But Palace attendant Rong, who was still in a joyful mood, was not disappointed. Her figure floated up and landed towards the enormous pillar of smoke. She reached out to grab the last flower remnant sword. No swordsman below Realm 6 could withstand such power when it hit the flying sword. When a flying sword was hit so heavily by a controller, the controller would naturally be seriously injured. For palace attendant Rong, if she could defeat this flying sword and stop Ding Ning from using it, Ding Ning would undoubtedly lose this battle. She did not even need to hurry to find Ding Ning, who was playing hide and seek with her. She just needed to rest and recover her vital energy. Amidst the wild gasps, the last flower remnant sword that had charged up with the dust landed in her hand. This remnant sword was covered in dust, its light dim. It could not resist at all. Liuli looked up at this scene. Even she felt that palace attendant Rong, who was flying next to the enormous pillar of smoke, was like a demon. Her expression became extremely ugly. The sword was the life of a swordsman. She could not imagine how Ding Ning could win this battle when the last flower remnant sword was in palace attendant Rong's hands. At this time, the enormous pillar of smoke suddenly split apart. In the summer, a white stream of snow cut apart the enormous pillar of smoke. Ding Ning appeared again. He appeared at the other end of the pillar of smoke that had been cut apart. He held a long sword in his hand. The original color of the sword could not be seen because it was covered in thick snow. Snow reflection sword. On the turret, Huang Jinwei stilled and instinctively shouted the name of this sword. Jing Liuli was also stunned. This was her sword. It was also one of the strongest swords of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Ever since she started learning from Ding Ning, this sword had been kept by Ding Ning. She could imagine Ding Ning using this sword, but she could not imagine the sword essence Ding Ning was using right now. She did not know what kind of secret sword Ding Ning's sword was. But the power of this sword, the cold presence, was above the cold mountain thousand snow that she could only use when she used the vital energy of cold mountain snow with this sword. Palace attendant Rong straightened her body slightly. She did not think at all, and just swung the last flower remnant sword in her hand. The sword threads at the front of the last flower remnant sword split apart and immediately gave off shrill sword howls, just as shrill as her cries just now. The snow streams surging towards her immediately collapsed. As the snow and ice flew, Ding Ning's body seemed to shake like he had been struck by lightning. He flew backwards and spat out mouthfuls of blood. Amidst the gasps, the madness in palace attendant Rong's eyes seemed to burn completely. She took a step forward. Her body crossed dozens of feet in the air and chased after Ding Ning's flying body. Is this all you have? Are there any other moves? Her left foot that had been stabbed by Ding Ning started to bleed rapidly again. Many of the wounds on her body started to bleed, but she did not care. In her view, everything was about to end. On the nearby turret, Huang Jinwei's robes vibrated softly. He was hesitating whether to act or not. Palace attendant Rong's last flower remnant sword swept towards Ding Ning's neck. Now, she knew why she hated Ding Ning so much. She would only be satisfied when she saw Ding Ning's head fly. Ding Ning made her hate everything, even herself. More gasps sounded. Ding Ning was so seriously injured that he might not even be able to use his vital energy well. How could he block palace attendant Rong's blow? Also, palace attendant Rong was close to him. But at this time, palace attendant Rong sensed an unusual presence. She unconsciously looked at her right hand. She suppressed the power of the last flower remnant sword and the sword essence of the stubborn Bazin Kendo ground woman. However, her hand was not as strong as the last flower remnant sword. Her flesh and bones could not withstand such an attack. An extremely cold aura pierced through the bloody mist that had exploded from her palm and pierced towards her body with a biting, cold-killing intent. How is this possible? An official of the astrology bureau under the black umbrella was so shocked that he couldn't help but cry out. In the presence of Yi Sealing, it was a very serious matter for an official like him to lose control of his emotions and exclaim. Yet no one noticed at this time. Even Yi Sealing did not notice. Just like all these cultivators, she still had the afterimage of the previous scene in her eyes. But in her perception, she could sense Ding Ning's sword-approaching palace attendant Rong's body. No one could understand how Ding Ning was able to control the vibrating vital energy in his body and attack like this. Palace attendant Rong could not understand either. The true essence in her body was also extremely chaotic at this time, but she still had her left hand, so she had not sensed the arrival of death. She still believed that her left hand was enough to deal with Ding Ning's attack and kill Ding Ning. Her left hand stabbed straight forward. All the chaotic vital energy and primal energies of the universe in her left hand were forced out of her fingertips. Ding Ning took a deep breath. The snow mirror sword in his hand collided with the power palace attendant Rong, had forced out without any finesse. In this moment, his face paled. With a puff, he spat out a mouthful of bloody mist. But the snow mirror sword in his hand did not retreat at all and flicked upwards. This was the secret sword of White Goat Cave. White Goat Hanging Horn. Palace attendant Rong took a deep breath. She only needed a breath to adjust the vital energy in her body. She only needed a breath to kill Ding Ning. Yet at this time, she suddenly felt pain in her energy sea. She looked down in shock. A hole appeared in her abdomen where her energy sea was, a hole that went from front to back. Her body started to tremble, but her mind was still blank. She did not even dare to believe this was real. But what was real was that the cultivation she had worked hard to accumulate for many years seemed to have disappeared like this and charged out of her body through this hole. All the feeling of power faded from her body. Her body was pushed back by the vital energy and energy that had charged out of her body and flew into the air. In the surrounding streets, all the spectators were shocked and bewildered. That was a sword light. It was the last flower remnant sword that had fallen powerlessly. Yet in that moment, the last flower remnant sword flew up, piercing through palace attendant Rong's energy sea and flying into the air behind her. Chapter 392. There were no clouds covering the sun, but the sky suddenly darkened because many wondrous rays of light and energy had blocked the sunlight. These rays of light were wondrous and enough to cause most cultivators present to tremble from the bottom of their hearts, because in their cultivation process, they had never touched the energy contained in these rays of light, or rather, they would never touch the energy in these rays of light in their entire lives, because these rays of light came from high up in the sky and usually did not fall to the ground. The moment they reacted, these powerful cultivators bowed their heads in fear. As though bowing their heads was not enough to express their awe, their bodies also bowed slightly. The cultivators in these streets seemed to be much shorter than usual. As to the people of Chongling, who were not even cultivators, they almost knelt on the ground in shock when they saw the perfect woman who had appeared with the wondrous starlight and caused the sky to darken. No one spoke at this time, but everyone knew that this seemingly otherworldly woman was the mistress of Chongling and the entire Qin dynasty. The empress, Huang Jinwei, also looked in shock at this perfect woman who covered all the light in the world and seemed to gather all the color in the world on her body. He had not expected the empress to leave the palace and appear here. Ding Ning did not look up. He coughed up blood and sensed that familiar presence. While he forced his hands to tremble, his body seemed to be trembling all over. He found that while he hated this woman, who came from Jiaodong Commandery and changed the situation of Chongling and the Qin dynasty, when he truly faced this woman, it was still difficult and unbearable. He did not know if it was because he was unwilling to look or because he did not dare to look. From beginning to end, he did not look up at her. The starlight covered the sun. The Empress of the Qin dynasty had arrived. The last thread of blood in Palace Attendant Rong's heart was flowing down the broken sword into the dust below. Palace Attendant Rong had not seen the flying sword that had stabbed towards her heart, but at this time she clearly saw this perfect woman who seemed to cover the entire sky in front of her. Previously, she had felt the city was empty, and everything was empty. She only felt this was laughable and did not even feel pain. However, at the end of her life, the instant she saw this perfect woman, her body began to convulse. She felt immense pain. She began to understand that her entire life had been shrouded in this woman's shadow. In other people's eyes, and even in her own eyes, all of her power and influence came from this woman, and her power and influence were shocking enough. However, before she died, she realized that this woman was too perfect and powerful. When she met her, she was no longer herself. She was just scared. She had always been afraid of her. The Empress walked up to her, looking at Palace Attendant Rong, who was convulsing and bleeding tears, her brow slowly furrowed. An incomprehensible expression appeared on her porcelain-like face. Why? She looked at Palace Attendant Rong, who was in the final throes of pain. With a hint of anger and indescribable pain, she asked softly, "I said that if you do not leave the palace, I can ensure your safety. Why did you leave the palace?" Palace Attendant Rong looked at the Empress. She should have died by now. Yet, she found that she was not dead. She still had the strength to speak. A fresh presence flowed out of the Empress' sleeve into her body, replacing the last of her blood as it flowed into her body. This presence was immortal, otherworldly, and not of the mortal world. Yet, this presence was too familiar to Palace Attendant Rong, so familiar that the lotus pond appeared in her mind. The Empress would spend a lot of time each day standing in front of the spirit lotus pond. In the eyes of other people, this presence was a pure and holy white energy. Ding Ning did not look up, but he clearly sensed this presence. He sensed that Palace Attendant Rong, who should have died, was hanging on to her last breath. His body immediately froze. The dead could not speak and would hide many secrets. But Palace Attendant Rong was not dead yet. If she spoke of a secret, he and many people in Chongling would die, or suffer a fate worse than death. There were countless words in Palace Attendant Rong's mind. The medicinal power of the spirit lotus could not save her from death, but it made her mind clearer than ever. She thought of the last few moments when Ding Ning had fought her. She started to understand why Ding Ning had been able to kill her so easily. So this was the reason. It was not just because of Shui Wangshu, but also because of that person and many people from the Bazin Kendo ground who had died because of her. She had a chance, enough time to speak. Yet, when she heard the voice of the perfect woman who covered her, filled with regret, she did not speak in such a precious time. She used a lot of time to think of many beautiful scenes. She thought about how before she followed this perfect woman, she thought about how she admired those people's swords and battles. She thought about how she met that tea master and how she and that tea master had imprisoned each other, as if they would be imprisoned like this for the rest of their lives. Yet these scenes disappeared in the end. In the end, everything was gone. Tears of blood came out of the corners of her eyes again. She looked at her perfect mistress. The other's last words seemed to ring in her ears. "Why did you leave the palace?" "Because I still can't be as cold as you." She smiled miserably, tears of blood flowing down her face. She used the last of her strength to say these words. The Empress' breathing suddenly stopped. She was truly stunned. She had not expected Palace Attendant Rong to say such a thing in the end. So much so that her body felt a little cold at this moment and a little stiff. But this emotion only appeared for a moment. In the next moment, her brow furrowed slightly. All of the anger and regret in her eyes disappeared into indifference, or rather, into a gaze that was as high as a god. She controlled the world without any emotion of her own. There were no traces of age or blemishes on her perfect face. Her somewhat indifferent gaze fell on Ding Ning, who was coughing blood with his head down. Then she said emotionlessly, "I thought you would stay your hand, at least for my good intentions." There was no preamble to her words, and she did not lower her volume. All the cultivators present heard her clearly. No one felt that she was being too domineering. They only felt that it was normal for her to say such a thing, given her status. It was a matter of course. Some people even started to recall the good intentions she had shown to Ding Ning and Ding Ning's responses. They even unconsciously started to feel that if Ding Ning did not give a reason, they would feel that Ding Ning had gone too far in this matter. Especially at this time, when this extremely noble empress personally said these words to Ding Ning. To their surprise, Ding Ning just coughed blood and said softly, "I am very sorry." But these 3 words caused many people to feel like a cold wind had blown through their hearts. After Ding Ning said these 3 words, he did not say anything else. The empress turned around. She did not say anything else. The sky gradually brightened. The falling starlight started to disappear. She disappeared into the disappearing starlight. Ding Ning still did not look up. This was his first reunion with the empress. All of this made the Ain River flow underground extremely heavy, crushing down on the bodies of the cultivators. It was completely different from fighting on the surface. What terrified Su Finchin was, in this underground Ain River, there was only him and Bai Shan Shui. No one else would interfere. Previously, his battle with Bai Shan Shui had only allowed him and Bai Shan Shui to enter deeper into the Ain River. The increasingly strong Ain and cold water caused the black longsword swimming around him to feel greater pressure. He felt everything was slowing down, and his defense would have problems at any time. Since defense was useless, he could only counterattack. The black sword light that had been spinning around him left his side, passing through the black, crystal-like water flow, and slowly and steadily fell towards Bai Shan Shui's body. In the darkness without any light, Bai Shan Shui's body could not be seen clearly. But there was a ball of green water deeper than the darkness rippling around Bai Shan Shui's body, giving off true murderousness. Streaks of green sword energy moved against the flow of the Ain River without any obstruction and stabbed towards Su Finchin. While Su Finchin's black sword was moving through the water, his body was already inexplicably covered with more than 10 wounds. Some of the wounds were so deep that his bones could be seen. The blood that flowed out from these wounds melted into the black water, as if several red ribbons had appeared on his body out of nowhere. Compared to the green water flow around Bai Shan Shui, Su Finchin's sword appeared very small. It was like a small black fish hook against an enormous blue whale. But Su Finchin's expression did not change much. His sword was called the whale fishing sword. When the black sword came into contact with the huge ball of green light, the entire ball of green light was held back by the sword force of his sword, and no sword light could flow out. Countless rays of light came out of Su Finchin's body. This was the primal energies of the universe in his body burning. The burning primordial chi produced dazzling lines that resembled the broken strings of a zither. His entire body was like a burning zither. This was when he was most terrifying. Only a few people knew that the reason he had the name Su Finchin was because the vital energy method he cultivated was called the burning zither scripture. The most terrifying aspect of this method was that one could obtain greater power by burning large amounts of vital energy in an instant. Even if this power could only be maintained for a short time, it was enough to kill or escape. When the glowing water droplet turned into a horizontal river and slammed him into the underground river, He was certain that Bai Shanshui's cultivation had grown completely. At this time, Bai Shanshui was not the Bai Shanshui who had been singing and fighting on the streets of Chongling, but Bai Shanshui was not realmate. He was sure that as long as he escaped from the Yin River, he would be able to live a good life. He only needed a moment. He was certain that unless Bai Shanshui was realmate, he could not defeat his whale fishing sword in this moment. All the energy beams that were like burning zither strings stabbed upwards, instantly evaporating all the water around him and bouncing his body up at an astounding speed. However, at this moment, his face turned abnormally pale. He sensed a new power emerging from the Yin River underground, a power that seemed to have formed inexplicably in the river, but was as strong as Bai Shanshui. Also, this power formed like a storm, and was even more violent than Bai Shanshui's power. He even felt a sense of familiarity. He realized where this power came from. Yi, he cried out in disbelief, yet he was only able to say one word. His voice could not be heard in the underground Yin River. That power that came along the river seemed to merge perfectly with Bai Shanshui's power. There was a cracking sound in his ears. A cracking sound was also heard from his body. The black sword was repelled and stabbed deeply into his body, almost cutting open his abdomen. His energies and shattered organs started to burn at the same time. More multicolored light gushed out from his body. There was a loud boom. An explosion occurred by a river bank in the outskirts of Chongling. A patch of reeds started to burn. A ball of light flew out of the ground into the air. The phoenix carriage returned on the main road of Chongling. When this ray of light appeared in the sky, the phoenix carriage suddenly sank. The thousands of golden threads covering the phoenix chariot floated up together, making a sound that sounded like wind chimes. The perfect woman from Jiaodong Commandery looked up slightly in the direction of the ray of light. She knew what had happened, but her expression became colder than when she saw palace attendant Rong die, so cold that it did not change at all. Chapter 394. Jing Liuli was still thinking on the steps. She instinctively felt that she had missed something very simple, but she could not remember it. The light that shot into the sky by the river only appeared for a short moment. However, the powerful origin energy caused a gust of wind to blow. In the tiger and wolf army's camp, many tents swayed slightly. Sitting cross-legged on the bamboo mat, Liang Lian suddenly opened his eyes. He was a Realm 7 expert, and naturally sensed that this gust of wind came from unusual energy vibrations. Unlike other places in Chongling, when this gust of wind blew into the tiger and wolf army's tents, there was a bone-chilling coldness. The moment Liang Lian opened his eyes, a layer of blue-black frost formed on his hair and eyebrows. A coldness that seemed to come from the deepest depths of the earth broke through the air and arrived in front of him. His expression changed dramatically. Without time to think, his hands slammed down on the desk in front of him. With a muffled boom, the desk shattered, and a dark gold round shield flew out from the wooden compartment. The runes on the shield were like bright red roses, and instantly attracted the chi of heaven and earth to move like a mountain. The entire central tent collapsed like a deflated balloon. In the next moment, with a fierce explosion, the entire tent turned into countless pieces of leather that stabbed outwards like swords. An extremely deep blue and black sword light flew out of nowhere. As though breaking through space, it passed through the entire northern tiger wolf army and headed straight for the center of the main tent, where Liang Lian's entire body seemed to swell outwards. Countless loud shouts rang out. Sword lights danced in the air, and at least dozens of flying swords met the sword light with a resolute aura. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of ice forming could be heard. In the path of this deep blue black sword radiance, not only were several flying swords directly covered in dark black ice crystals falling to the ground, even several cultivators were directly frozen where they were, turning into ice sculptures without any signs of life. What frightened the swordsmen the most was that even now they were unable to determine where the controller of this sword light was. Liang Lian's expression was cold, as if he was wearing a black iron mask. His heart violently contracted. He knew who the owner of this sword light was, and he knew that he was no match for him. Southeast, 347. He shouted out the woman's location, and at the same time, most of the true origin in his body surged into the bottom of his body. The blanket beneath his body had already been blown to pieces, revealing a silver-like flash. 6 silver, hexagonal metal pillars rose from the ground, protecting him in the center. Boom! The blue-black sword light that came from an unknown distance collided with the power released and gathered by the 6 metal pillars, creating a violent explosion. Boom! Almost at the same time, a loud noise that was hundreds of times louder than this one, seemingly occupying the entire space of the camp, rang out. All the chariots in the camp of the tiger and wolf army shone brightly. A sea of light formed in the camp. Then there was the sound of countless, enormous objects moving through the air. Dozens of white, cloud-like airwaves exploded in midair. Dozens of spear-shaped artifacts, as thick as a person's waist, broke through the clouds and landed in the direction Liang Lian pointed out. That place was constantly expanding outwards, spreading out like demonic lotuses. At this time, it had already formed a world of snowstorms. Zhang Sun Qianxue was standing at the center of this snowstorm. All the soldiers and cultivators of the tiger and wolf army were furious. They knew that the cultivator in this snowstorm was extremely powerful and much stronger than the strongest cultivator in the camp, General Liang Lian. Otherwise, General Liang would not have activated his strongest defensive artifact, the 6 Gates Celestial Lock. Yet in the history of the Qin dynasty, there had never been a general of the Qin dynasty who had been assassinated in the main tent. In the armies of some dynasties that were enemies of the Qin dynasty, there might have been a general of 100,000 who had been assassinated by a Qin cultivator. But in the Qin dynasty, there had never been a general like this who had been assassinated in the main tent, especially this kind of unscrupulous and direct assassination. Right now, any local army of the Qin dynasty had seal weapons that could kill 1 or 2 Realm 7 cultivators, much less the tiger and wolf army that protected Chongling, the elite troops of the Qin dynasty. When it was necessary, most of them wouldn't even blink even if they had to use the flesh and blood of tens of thousands of soldiers to fill it up. Bravery, this was the most terrifying aspect of the Qin army in the eyes of the other dynasties. Zhang Sun Qianxue knew that even at that person's peak, he could not challenge an army like this alone. When that person died in battle in Chongling, all the cultivators in the world had a clear idea. A top cultivator in the world could at most kill 20 to 30 Realm 7s and 20,000 Qin soldiers. Also, in the last decade, the seal weapons of all the armies in the world had improved greatly and had greater power. Zhang Sun Qianxue felt the power of the dozens of enormous metal seal weapons piercing through the clouds. She had never seen them before. But now, all of this was due to someone's plan. She was just carrying out this person's plan. So she did not have to think at all. She looked up at the dozens of thick spears falling towards her, until the light of the metal caused the wind and snow around her to shine with a metallic luster, until she saw the coiling dragon seal scripts on the enormous spears. She released all of her vital energy and accumulated energy, including the power of the life bond sword in her energy sea. The wind and snow swept in front of her. The dozens of enormous spears were swept up by the wind and snow, and all of them fell back to the camp. The wind and snow filled the camp. The tents were overturned one after another. When they hit the ground, they produced a clear metallic sound. The originally flexible leather was actually forcefully snapped. The fury in the eyes of many cultivators turned to awe. They had heard some legends about that eldest Miss Gongsun and knew that the sword was in her hands. Looking at the tents sealed in ice, they could not connect this power to the legendary eldest Miss Gongsun. Their line of sight was filled with blue-black light, and they had completely lost track of the woman. When they subconsciously turned around, wanting to hear the Grand General's next instructions, their breaths completely stopped. Dozens of enormous icicles seemed to stand chaotically in the center army. The coiling dragon seal scripts inside the icicles seemed to have grown to the outside of the icicles, and the blue-black ice stretched upwards like dragons. These icicles sealed off the entire center army. The wind and snow outside quickly weakened, but the wind and snow between the icicles grew thicker. The growing, cold, fiendish energy prevented even the Realm 5 and 6 cultivators in the army from getting close. Even their blood seemed to freeze. Zhang's son Qianxue looked at the camp in the distance. Those enormous metal spears had inherited the sword essence of the sword in her body. The powerful energy of the sword was channeled into those enormous metal spears, enough to maintain this sword essence for a long time. She felt her strength. She was very satisfied, but after using up all the power in her body, she was now a powerless, ordinary person. She took a deep breath, turned, and started to walk towards a patch of trees behind her. There was a carriage parked in the forest. The person driving the carriage was very short, but even when he saw what Zhang's son Qianxue had done, this person did not seem too shocked. He just asked in puzzlement, "Just this? Then who killed Liang Lian?" Zhang's son Qianxue still had a cold expression. She seemed unwilling to answer, but out of respect for this person, she said impatiently, "That has nothing to do with me." Chapter 395. Liang Lian's body was as cold as iron. His eyebrows and hair were all frozen like needles. There was a thin layer of frost on his skin that gave off a blue-black light. The entire tiger and wolf army's main camp had become the true nine nether hell. Liang Lian's gaze landed on his hands. Looking at the cracks on the skin of his hands, feeling the killing intent of the coldest sword energy in the world in his body, and feeling those internal injuries that suddenly became more serious, his expression was only one of indifference, but he felt puzzled in his heart. Sealing the camp was naturally to prevent his subordinates from entering this area. But this kind of cold had the same effect on any cultivator who entered. If eldest Miss Gongsun wanted to seek justice for the person she loved and hated back then, and did not want to see him leave Chongling and not have a chance to kill her in the future, then she would not be able to kill him. Then, after this eldest miss of the Gongsun family left, who could enter here to kill him? In all of Chongling, who among those people would stand on her side and enter here to kill him? Suddenly, his eyes narrowed slightly. The corners of his eyes cracked from the cold, but were immediately frozen by the cold energy as though he had drawn a red eyeliner. A figure suddenly appeared in the blue-black wind and snow, carrying a box. The box was covered in blue-black ice crystals and appeared very large, like a coffin. This was a youth who should not have been here and should have been somewhere else. Military intelligence was usually the fastest to report back. Liang Lian did not leave the camp, but he knew the final result of the battle that had just ended. In the military report, this youth was seriously wounded. Liang Lian's eyes slowly widened, and the corners of his eyes cracked again. He seemed to find something amusing, and could not help but laugh. Then he looked seriously at the youth and asked, "9 death, silkworm?" This youth was Ding Ning. It seemed impossible for him to appear here, but he just had to appear in this kind of wind and snow. He was not coughing up blood. The surrounding wind and snow did not cause any tangible damage to him, but seemed to fill up some of the dry places in his body. Ding Ning looked a little pale. However, he was very calm, and his breathing was very smooth. Moreover, he was emitting an unprecedentedly powerful aura. At this time, he was sharper and stronger than when he had fought palace attendant Rome. At this moment, he was like a sword that had been completely unsheathed. You pretended to be seriously injured, and then came to kill me. This way, no one will think it is you, especially if I die in the hands of the 9-death silkworm. In the hands of that person's heir, you will be even more innocent. Before Ding Ning spoke, Liang Lian shook his head and said softly, as though he was mocking and praising, "In the future, no one will think that you are the heir to the 9-death silkworm. Such a beautiful plan to kill several birds with one stone, as expected of that person's successor." Ding Ning looked at him calmly. Finally, his tightly pressed lips opened slightly and said, "No one would have thought that a cart driver back then would become General Liang today by selling out his friends for glory." Liang Lian said with cold disdain, "Does a cart driver have to be a cart driver?" Ding Ning shook his head and said, "Not necessarily, but to use such a method to become General Liang, you deserve to die." "I really admire you." Liang Lian looked up and said sincerely, "Even the air that person found is so powerful. If I die, who would think that the one who came to assassinate me is you? Who would think that you killed 2 great enemies in one day? But if you want to complete this plan, you must first be able to kill me. Right now, I am just a general who lacks military merit and has not been made a marquis." After a pause, Liang Lian laughed so hard that the blue-black ice on his face fell off. "I am a Realm 7 cultivator, and not a palace attendant." Ding Ning shook his head. Looking at this disdainful general, he sincerely corrected his words. "A seriously injured cultivator. The coldness is at its thickest, and then it will fade. This is the best time to attack. What are you waiting for?" Liang Lian put away his smile and looked at Ding Ning and the coffin-like box behind Ding Ning. "I am also very curious. After using so many moves, what other moves do you have? Controlling sword essence? Controlling Miss Gongsuan's sword essence? And then when the snowstorm dissipates, can my army outside charge in?" General battles were not just about cultivation, but also mental attacks. But this was of no use to Ding Ning, since even Yi Xiling, by Shan Shui, Zhang Sun Qianxue, and many other stunning people were willing to become pawns in his plan. Then for him, he just had to act according to plan. When Liang Lian spoke, he knew that Liang Lian was about to attack. Then he accurately attacked before Liang Lian. The ice coffin-like iron box on his back opened an inch with a cracking sound. The last flower remnant sword flew out, the shadows on the blade dissipating. Liang Lian suddenly turned his head. In the wind and snow, a sword essence broke through the air behind him. He could not understand, but power unconsciously erupted from his hand. A muffled boom. His body swayed. With a splash, a black wave of water poured down, turning into countless ice beads that fell to the ground behind him. He slowly put away the simple, long sword behind him. A thread of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth, and then froze on his face. Controlling sword essence. This is by Shanshui's sword essence. Liang Lian looked at Ding Ning in the wind and snow ahead and slowly spoke. "Your timing is too good. By Shanshui just used a sword. So this sword essence is very strong. What else do you have?" He wanted to see what else Ding Ning had, but he would not foolishly wait for Ding Ning to use all of his moves. His sword did not seem to move, but with a hiss a corner of the wind and snow in the sky cracked. A terrifying presence gathered like a rod and smashed down like a heavenly punishment. This was the power of a realm 7. Many explosions came from Ding Ning's body. Theoretically, he should not even be able to move right now. But at this time, countless silkworm sounds came from his body. Countless visible sparks of light surged out of his body, looking like countless real silkworms. Rustling sounds appeared in the air. The vital essence in Ding Ning's body flowed out steadily. The iron box behind him let out a shrill hiss, full of fear. Then the metal box opened several feet. A new snowstorm was formed as the black frost yuan qi in the iron box burst out with all its might. The countless silkworms covering Ding Ning's body opened their mouths at the same time and spat out the wind and snow that had been absorbed during his cultivation with Zhangsun Qianxue over the past decade. It was like all restraints had been undone. This was true impudence. Ding Ning's sword essence was also impudent, as the last flower remnant sword danced. All of this energy changed in the world dozens of feet in front of him, turning into a sword essence that Liang Lian could not understand and could not reach. All of his pride and confidence disappeared. He started to understand his mistake. He wanted to speak, but because of great terror, his voice trembled so much he could not make a sound. Ding Ning's sword had not finished. Hiss, 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 hiss. The cold, fiendish swords in his body all flew out. These small swords flew straight out, but did not return to one point, and drew out straight paths. Every line was a unique talisman. The newly formed snowstorm belonged to these seal marks. Then all of the power changed, and turned into a sword light that Liang Lian had seen before. If he was not seriously injured and could use his Realm 7 power, he should have been able to receive this sword light. But at this time, he could clearly sense that his power was lacking by a thread. Just a thread, and it would be life and death. This sword was called One Thread of Heaven. Liang Lian's sword essence had completely erupted. The sword in his hand was still moving forward, but a line of blood had already appeared between his eyebrows. An expanding line of blood. Chapter 3, 96. So you are not. Liang Lian looked fixedly at Ding Ning. Then a drop of blood came out of his brow, and he fell backwards. The moment he fell, his skin was covered in blue-black ice again. But this time, the ice and snow did not simply stay on the surface of his body, but seeped into his skin. When he fell to the ground, he had turned into a blue-black ice sculpture. This great general, who had gone through countless battles in his life and climbed out of piles of corpses many times without dying, finally died. He did not want to die. Yet, he died before leaving Chongling. No one heard the contents of his unfinished words, and no one knew what kind of secret was hidden in his last words. Ding Ning covered his mouth and nose with his hand. He was holding a thick cotton cloth in his hand. The moment the cotton cloth touched his lips and nose, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His breathing was uneven. Blood poured out of his mouth and nose, but he used the thick cloth to cover it all. The blood froze the cloth. Not even a drop of blood fell on the ground in front of him. His vision was blurry. Each breath he took felt like a small knife was scraping his chest, and the knife seemed to be covered in fine steel needles that went deep into his sternum. But he was very happy. He laughed as he vomited blood. By Shanshue's sword essence, Zhangsun Qianxue used all of her power and waited for so many years to finally kill you. Can you not die? He looked with unusual satisfaction at Liang Lian's corpse. Then he took another deep breath and started to run. He started to run towards the edge of the snowstorm. There was a pool there for horses to drink. At this time, the water in the pool had all disappeared. There was only a crack in the ground leading to the underground river. The carriage was sprinting towards the outskirts of Chongling. Zhang Sun Qianxue closed her eyes slightly and leaned against the cushions of the carriage. In that short moment, she had already forced out all the power in her body, so she was no different from an ordinary person. But her cultivation was still there. Her perception was still stronger than most cultivators in Chongling. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and raised her head. Even though her vision was completely blocked by the roof of the carriage, her beautiful face that caused one's heart to tremble was still instantly filled with an expression of anger. A stream of flames appeared high up in the sky. A pale, white star fell from the endless void. This has nothing to do with you. Zhang Xiu's sword strike is because of me, not you. However, at this time, the driver of the carriage turned his head and said softly to her. Then, the short coachman's body flew out from the front of the carriage, heading straight for a mountain to the side. The carriage continued to run along the road. Soon, another coachman came out from the forest beside the road and landed at the front of the carriage. The anger on Zhang Sun Qianxue's face had not disappeared, but when she sensed the direction of the starfire, she realized why Ding Ning wanted her to lose all of her vital energy and energy. After losing all her aura, the Empress who was returning to the palace could no longer sense her location. You understand her too well. However, the moment she came to her senses, the anger on her face became even more intense. At this time, the anger on her face appeared very pure, like a young girl who had not experienced the world. The short coachman had reached a mountain to the side. The mountain was not tall, but there were many trees. When the short driver began to reveal his true aura on the mountain, all the trees on the mountain began to turn red and then burst into flames. The short coachman looked up at the sky. The pale, white star fire in the sky was visible to the naked eye as it fell towards the mountain. The flames of the trees were like the coachman's presence, giving off an unyielding and determined presence. The entire mountain had turned into a furnace. It was a blazing furnace that was hard to describe with words. All the flames left the burning trees. These trees were burning, the branches turning into black charcoal, and then quickly turning red, turning into white ash. However, all of the flames were pulled out, gathering at the peak of this mountain. Following the crazed fighting intent released by this carriage driver, it condensed into a flame sword, facing the pale white flame without any heat in the sky. With a boom, another bolt of thunder appeared in the sky. Previously, both the burning of the small mountain and the falling of the pale white star fire were too distant and small for Chongling. But when the thunder sounded in the sky, everyone in Chongling saw two enormous balls of fire explode in the sky above the countryside. One was pale white, spreading upwards like a holy white lotus. The other was fiery red, roiling like a furnace of molten iron. Looking at this red flame from a distance, many Chongling cultivators had ugly expressions. They knew that there was only one place where the cultivators could use such a sword essence. On the mountain top, the short coachman's hair danced in the wind. The light from the fire in the sky made her hair seem crimson red. The ground around her was covered in ashes, but there was an indescribable pride in her eyes. She gave people the feeling that she was a phoenix that had been reborn from the ashes. In Chongling, the Empress in the phoenix carriage did not look up even amidst the roar of thunder. But the coldness in her eyes deepened like a thin layer of autumn frost had formed. Many years later, she started to feel true shock and anger again. Palace attendant Rong was dead. Su Fanqin was dead. In her perception, Liang Lian should have died in the snowstorm. These people who had always served her, or had served her wholeheartedly, had all died in one day. That Zhao Fourth of the Zhao Sword Furnace, who had once been defeated by her, had managed to stop her attack, but her shock and anger did not just lie in this. The eldest miss of the Gongsun family, by Shan Shui of Cloud Water Palace, and the Zhao Sword Furnace. Her shock and anger was that these people seemed to have been pinched together by a pair of invisible hands. She felt a sense of familiarity, and that person still existed. She had been the one who had controlled Changling all these years like the mandate of heaven. After the decision was made back then, that person was an unbearable memory for her. All the sweetness in the past had turned to humiliation after the decision was made that night. Now, Palace Attendant Rome was dead. That person was also dead. No one should know of that night. But did that middle-aged tea master know, who had written that string of bone characters? Her body did not change at all, but the phoenix carriage started to tremble. High in the sky, many sparks flew chaotically. Amidst the thunder in the sky, Jing Liuli, who had been deep in thought outside the clinic, suddenly looked up. She saw the two balls of fire in the distant sky, and was so shocked her breathing stopped. She knew that something important was happening in the distance. In this moment, she seemed to have an epiphany. She understood what was wrong. She saw the change in the black ice worm. That black ice worm would definitely be of great help to Ding Ning. Yet in the battle with Palace Attendant Rome, she had not seen Ding Ning use the black ice worm. Based on her understanding of Ding Ning, it was absolutely impossible for Ding Ning to make a mistake and miss out on anything that could be used. Without any hesitation, before Yi Zhengnan could react to the change in emotions on her face, her figure disappeared from the door of the courtyard. She entered the clinic and passed through 2 courtyards at her fastest speed until she reached the room with the thickest scent of medicine. Then, when the person inside shouted in shock and anger, her hand had already landed on the door of the room. The door of the room naturally opened. When she saw the situation inside, she stilled. There were bloodstains all over the bed in the room. Ding Ning was unconscious. A doctor looked angrily at her, his eyes almost spitting fire. Jing Liuli was silent for a breath. Then she nodded apologetically and left the door, closing it behind her. Chapter 397. When all the trees on the burning hill turned to ash, Zhao Ci's figure disappeared from the top of the hill. The pale white sparks flying in the sky had all disappeared without a trace. However, the red flames produced by the burning of these trees were still floating in the air like an oven that was growing bigger and bigger. The starfire of the Empress and Zhao Ci's sword came from the eternal stars in the endless void, but it lost to the fire of the trees of this world. Because in this world, the fire of the mixed wood had ignited his entire life in an instant. In northern tiger wolf army's main camp, before all of the ice and snow on the enormous icicles faded, there were finally some cultivators who didn't care about the damage the cold energy that seemed to come from the underworld brought to them, charging into the main camp. Then they saw General Liang turn to an ice sculpture on the ground. In the blue-black ice, the red line at Liang Lian's brow was unusually shocking. In their perception, it rippled with soul-shaking sword essence. In this moment, these experienced cultivators could not control themselves. In their shock and anger, they could not speak. In the alley outside the medical clinic where Ding Ning and Palace Attendant Rome were fighting, the crowd had retreated. The surroundings were silent. Jing Liuli walked out of the door under Yi Zhengnan and Su Hashan's puzzled gazes. For some reason, she felt even more admiration for Ding Ning. But her legs were heavy, as though filled with lead. The presences in the sky were slightly chaotic. Moreover, because so many experts had completely released their auras, even the sky had darkened. There were clearly no dark clouds, but it was as if there were dark clouds covering the sun. Some drops of rain fell on the ground in front of Jing Liuli. The rain carried a hint of nether coldness, as though it had melted the ice and snow from the tiger and wolf army's camp. At this time, Jing Liuli suddenly looked up. The crowd in front had already dispersed, and a young man walked out of the quiet alley. The youth wore bright purple robes. However, for some reason, the purple robe on his body gave off an ethereal and illusory feeling. His entire aura was the same. It was illusory and ethereal like a piece of cloud. Sitting on the doorstep, Yi Zhengnan's pupils contracted violently. He saw the youth's face clearly. This youth had a clean face. He looked a little young and inexperienced, but he gave him an exceptionally terrifying and dangerous feeling, causing the blood in his body to surge violently. In his impression, even when he saw Jing Liuli for the first time, he only felt the pressure and awe of a mountain, but not this feeling of danger. Who was this youth? His breathing began to stop. Jing Liuli was different from him. The moment she saw this youth, she knew who this person was. In all of Chongling, other than Ding Ning, only one person could make her feel like this. And Baosher, her brows furrowed slightly as she looked at the young man who was floating over like a cloud, and said, "Don't worry." Behind her, Su Heshan was also stunned. Just like how Jing Liuli's appearance in Chongling was enough to shock all of Chongling, the appearance of an Baosher of Lingshu Sword Gate in Chongling meant that something unusual had happened. The purple-robed youth smiled. This smile gave him a human presence, like he had landed on the ground from the clouds. But when a person from the sky landed on the ground, he still did not seem to be in the human world. So while he was real, he gave off an eerie presence. "I am an Baosher." He looked at Jing Liuli, who did not disguise her enmity. Without any courtesy, he asked directly, "Do you know why all of Chongling placed us side by side, but I never left Lingshu Sword Gate to find you?" Jing Liuli looked coldly at him and said, "I do not know." And Baosher said, "Because I always feel that you are not as good as me. I do not think I need to go out of my way to prove myself." His tone was ordinary, and his expression was indifferent. He did not seem proud at all, but he gave off a very proud feeling, so proud that even Su Heshan, who was half a head taller than him, felt he was looking up at him. Jing Liuli was not angry. She looked at him and said, "And now?" And Baosher glanced behind Jing Liuli. "Now there is someone who can stand side by side with me, so you are no longer a match for me." Jing Liuli laughed and said, "So you mean that in the future, I am not even worthy of standing side by side with you, so you came to tell me?" And Baosher looked at her smiling but cold face and shook his head seriously. "I came out of Lingshu Sword Gate to see Ding Ning's fight." He shook his head and then said in an emotional tone, "Since Ding Ning dares to challenge Palace Attendant Rong, he has a chance of winning with his cultivation. Even if there is just a chance of winning, it is worth coming to see in my view. But you also surprised me. You do not have a sword, but your sword essence is much stronger than before. It seems that you have improved greatly in these days in Chongling, so much so that I can test your sword." Hearing these words, Yi Zhengnan and Su Heshan's bodies unconsciously tensed again. This was undoubtedly a challenge. Enough shocking things had happened today. Now, when everyone thought the show was over, a legendary person like an Baosher actually appeared in front of them. All of this was as unreal as the dim light in front of them. Also, they knew that Jing Liuli would not avoid a challenge like this. In the span of a breath, Jing Liuli nodded and said, "All right, Chi La." A small tear suddenly appeared on an Baosher's purple robe sleeve, but his expression did not change. He was like a son of God from the kingdom of heaven. He still had no proud expression, but he gave people the feeling of extreme pride. He still nodded and said to Jing Liuli, "Please." Jing Liuli narrowed her eyes slightly. She naturally sent out the sword essence she had accumulated. There was no disturbance in front of her, but any natural seal lines that flowed with energy in the air seemed to be her sword essence. Her sword seemed to be everywhere in the world. Her sword seemed to exist in any invisible seal line in the world, and could appear in any seal line at any time and fall towards Boucher's body. This was the true sword essence of the great freedom sword. There was no sword, but Boucher was surrounded by swords. This was undoubtedly Jing Liuli's strongest attack, so strong that Su Heshan's body started to tremble. Only now did he understand how strong Jing Liuli, hailed as the monster of Changling's younger generation, was. The world was filled with swords. How could he stop this attack? Yet Boucher just stood there motionlessly. He was clearly standing there, but it was as if his entire being had become empty. Everything was empty. Everything was empty. Even if the sword fell, it would only hit empty space. Jing Liuli took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. The sword essence in the world disappeared. This is the supreme spirit void. She seemed to be talking to Boucher, but also seemed to be talking to herself. Boucher looked at her and nodded naturally. The two seemed to have never fought, but victory was decided. Jing Liuli's sleeves were cut off at the shoulders, revealing two white lotus-like arms. Boucher's expression did not change, and he gave off an eerie and inhuman presence. He did not look at Jing Liuli again, and looked past Jing Liuli at the courtyard behind her. Then he turned and left. The light in the open space dimmed slightly. Watching his back as he left, Yi Zhengnan and Su Heshan looked at the motionless Jing Liuli and suddenly felt slightly sad. This was because they felt that Jing Liuli would be very sad right now. But unexpectedly, when Jing Liuli turned and sat back down on the steps, it was as though nothing had happened. She did not feel any sadness. Chapter 398. A bright moon was reflected in the well. In the Yen Xanadu, next to this well of celestial seal sect, Zhang Yi was resting and rubbing his slightly swollen right shoulder. Carrying water was not a difficult task for cultivators like him. However, the paths in some places of celestial seal sect were very different from the paths of the outside world. Carrying water in those places was much more difficult than ordinary people carrying water on the mountain paths. "Why are you not sad?" A familiar voice reached his ears. He knew it was Su Qin. He slowly turned around and looked at Su Qin, who was walking in the darkness, somewhat puzzled. Su Qin looked coldly at him and stood at the other end of the well. Then he repeated, "Why are you not sad?" Zhang Yi was slightly shocked, but out of courtesy, he responded, "Why should I be sad? You have the best cultivation in White Goat Cave and are favored by your teachers. During the Min Mountain Sword Trials, you obtained a chance to enter Min Mountain Sword Sect to study. In Chongling, you are outstanding. But here, you are the worst of the worst. Just this month, you were punished to carry water 7 times. Su Qin said with slight disdain, "The people who joined the sect with you entered the 3rd Dao Hall at the very least, but you have not even comprehended the seal essence of the 1st Dao Hall. Do not tell me you are not sad." Zhang Yi finally understood, but his gentle expression did not change much. He was certain that Su Qin could not understand him. He was very polite, but he knew it was useless to speak to someone like Su Qin who could not understand him. So he closed his mouth and did not speak. Sometimes the gentle silence of people like him was disdain and resistance in other people's eyes. Su Qin looked at him, and his brows slowly furrowed. "Look at this seal," he slowly said to Zhang Yi. "This is one of the 30 seals of Celestial Seal Sect." After saying this, his left hand moved slightly. Several cracking sounds came from the wooden bucket beside Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi glanced at the bucket, then turned to look at Su Qin's left hand. He was shocked, and his face paled. The water in the bucket beside him didn't move at all, but several cracks appeared on the wooden bucket, and water slowly flowed out from within. Su Qin's left hand was still strangely twisted. It was still a crippled hand that could never hold a sword again. But Zhang Yi clearly sensed that the seal essence came from his left hand. Looking at Zhang Yi's pale face, Su Qin laughed happily. Stones from other mountains can be used to polish jade. The twisted flesh and meridians can't use swords anymore, but they can use different talisman intents. Can you understand the feeling of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel? Congratulations, Zhang Yi said. He did not like Su Qin anymore. Even though the other had once been his respected junior sect brother, his congratulations were still sincere. The water he carried on his shoulders started to lose power under the support of his vital energy. Then Zhang Yi's breathing stopped, and he was even more shocked. The characters formed by the silver light coming from these stone steps clearly formed a method of vital energy flow. Combined with the power of these steps, he could feel his vital energy flow slowly, but it seemed to grind through many places in his body and caused his body to undergo some qualitative changes. This vital energy method was many times stronger than the vital energy method he cultivated in White Goat Cave. He couldn't help but stop in his tracks. The moon passed the middle of the sky. The silver rays of light on the stone steps started to disappear. It looked like those characters had never existed. Zhang Yi began to understand that it was the water that flowed out of the bucket, and his sweat that was enough. The moonlight was bright enough when the moon was in the middle of the sky. Only then could the traces on the stone steps shine with a faint silver light. But why were there these marks on the stone steps? How could there be such a cultivation method? And why didn't any of the teachers mention it? Zhang Yi could not understand. Of course, he did not know that an old man he knew, but did not know his identity, was looking at him from a grass hut on the other side of the mountain path, his eyes filled with gratification and emotion. Celestial Seal Sect had many powerful seals, but in reality, the strongest seals left behind by generations of sect masters were hidden in the mountains and rivers of Celestial Seal Sect. Many people spent their entire lives searching for powerful methods against enemies in those records and lesson plans, but did not find even one true seal. Was it because those people's heads were too high and they always looked at the sky? They wanted to fly into the sky and were not willing to look down at the path. Or was it because of something else? Regardless, before the summer had passed, Zhang Yi had obtained one of the most important true seals of Celestial Seal Sect. This old man was very satisfied and was certain his decision was correct. After the moon passed the middle of the sky, the moonlight started to dim. In an alley in Xanadu, several barks could be heard. The capital of the Yan dynasty had been through hundreds of years. While there had been changes, it had not undergone drastic changes like the Qin dynasty's Chongling. So the buildings were of different heights, the alleys were of different width, the new and old buildings were scattered, and looked like the old and new were intertwined. The prosperity and new life of 100 years caused this capital to be very artistic, but also made the night even more complicated. An outsider with a follower was not familiar with this alley. He stepped on a puddle of water. It stained his shoes. His follower nimbly avoided all the puddles that could stain his new shoes. His shoes were clean. The dog stopped barking. Many figures were gathered at the two ends of this complicated alley. The outsider seemed to have expected this. He bowed to the front, his voice slightly tired and weak, just begging for food. Masters, please make it easy. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.